Dr. Hallis, she said she's coming.
Yeah, I figured she probably just got held up. She's probably trying to wolf down dinner or something like the rest of us. So, you know.
We are live.
Thank you, Mr. Ganesh. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Mrs. Widener, if you could kindly do the roll call.
Mr. Dorr,
Here.
Mrs. Evans Brockett,
Here.
Dr. Hallis,
Here.
Dr. Kolar,
Here.
Mrs. Lofton, Mrs. Lofton, Mrs. Mayers,
Here.
Mrs. Roberts,
Here.
Dr. Weston,
Here.
Ms. White.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to item 1.03, which is an approval of the agenda. Motion to approve the agenda as presented. Do I have a motion?
Motion. Second.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, the motion passes. The agenda is approved. That brings us to item 1.04, which is a special presentation increasing on-site instruction in our schools. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Russell.
Thank you, Dr. Hallis. This evening, I would like to present to the board a proposal to increase the amount of on-site instruction provided our students, and that would be a recommendation set to take place or be implemented later this month. Just a little bit about the school year. It's been nothing less than challenging for really any individual who participates in school in some way. And we've been conducting school very differently. Our classrooms, our buildings look very different when we walk inside. And that won't necessarily change whenever we move forward and have our students on site for more in-person instruction in our buildings. However, I do appreciate the way our staff have stepped up, the way our students and parents have been flexible and adaptable to the really, truly different way of doing school. I recognize there are a variety of differing opinions on the instructional models that we've implemented, the school schedules that we've hosted, the science behind COVID, as well as really what's best for students. Lots of different opinions. And I do appreciate hearing the voices of all. I'm hoping that as we continue to take steps out of this pandemic, because there truly is hope on the horizon, that we come closer together as remaining so differing in our views at times. But it's been an extremely challenging year. So we look back, we've learned a lot since last July. We're looking ahead. So if we look forward, we're thinking about getting our students back to that 5 full days a week schedule. And we'll talk just a little bit about the guidance and the research that supports that recommendation, as well as the procedures and protocols that will be in place in the event we bring our students back into that schedule. Now, I also want to talk about the gas and the brakes, as it was phrased in a recent task force meeting. What's prompting us to move forward with such a recommendation, and what will also prompt us to take a step back and maybe pivot or shift into those blended models, half day or hybrid, that we've come to know very well. So essentially, in a nutshell, we are recommending that we bring our students back beginning March 22nd at each level in a phased-in approach at the middle and high school levels to 5 full days in session. And this would be for interested half-day and virtual students at the elementary level, as well as interested hybrid and/or fully virtual students at the middle level and high school levels. And we have to unpack that a little bit as we think about some of the multi-layered mitigation strategies and steps that we've taken as we introduce more students into our school communities. However, right now, we're recommending to bring students back the end of the month on these dates, and I'll show you a more detailed schedule. I want to throw a disclaimer out there. I want to present a disclaimer as noted on the slide here that, again, the actual date of March 22nd or the other dates that you'll see in a second for any new schedule that's being proposed for any given grade level will be finalized once the enrollments are confirmed and considered as part of busing, the busing details, classroom spaces, and the lunchroom logistics. We'll talk more about that. But here's a draft schedule, a proposed schedule that would, again, bring back our students in grades 1 through 5 on March 22nd. And during that week, phase in our middle school students as well as our high school students. And as we have thought about returning students to our school settings, one of the biggest challenges to doing that has been around social or physical distancing, as it's called now, as it's referred to now. And we will aim for 6 feet of social distancing to the greatest extent possible. We're going to continue to do that. And in many cases, we will be able to meet that expectation. At the elementary level, we'll be very close to that in the classroom setups that are being organized as we project possibilities and enrollment numbers. Same at the middle school. The high school is more challenging, and we'll talk about that. So I'll share with you some approximations that are based right now on the number of students currently participating in a hybrid model. That's about 1,000 students. The high school, all total, hosts 1,800 students. So the 6 feet of social distancing is still a mitigation strategy where we aim for that as our maximum. That's what we strive to achieve as we mitigate the spread of corona. In some cases, we will not meet that if we bring all students back. So along with this recommendation, I also want to mention that parents may choose to remain in BV 2.0. That's the virtual model that's delivered by our teachers. At the elementary level, there are separate standalone teachers, while at the middle level and high school levels, our teachers are instructing, they're delivering via a dual model. They have students in front of them in the classroom, and they have some students in the Zoom room. It's a very challenging way to instruct students. However, moving forward, if parents and families are more comfortable remaining virtual, that remains an option. I am hoping to inform the board well enough to prompt questions and continue to provide answers to those questions over the course of the week, and request your consideration for action to approve these recommendations next week during the business meeting, which is our typical flow in terms of moving action items forward. So what's the guidance and the research? I've talked about the research quite a bit. I think, it's been discussed in a variety of different settings, and essentially we're learning more and more about this virus. We know a lot more today than we did last summer. And what's also good about, or in addition to what we've learned about the virus and really how to mitigate its spread, we're observing a decrease in hospitalizations and case incidents, not only in our county, also through the state and across the country. And that's really good news. And we're learning more about how to rely upon those threshold numbers, those incidence rates per 100,000 people or percent positivity rates. They have become part of a larger picture where we consider not only those rates and the multi-layered mitigation strategies or plans that we have in place, but also whether or not we're seeing linked transmission in our schools. That's really important. So I've called out and emphasized some of those aspects of the research and what we're reading currently in the literature. That's providing guidance to us, and we'll continue to stay up to date on new and emerging information about COVID. Parents and your voices in the community also guide us. We conducted a parent survey, and just to give you a sense of that last question posed to elementary parents as well as secondary parents, the majority would prefer traditional full day, 5 days a week schedule for their children. And really, we use the word traditional, and we're correcting ourselves because school now or in full-time mode, 5 full days a week, will not really be traditional. It will not be pre-pandemic. Our classrooms look different. The way that we present in the school buildings with masks and lots of hand hygiene and social distancing all looks different. Our protocols look different when it comes to cleaning and food services. So traditional really is a word that's being set aside. And instead, we refer to increased on-site instruction, 5 full days of instruction a week, as opposed to using that word. So there are times when I have referred to pre-pandemic school. I don't know that we'll ever get there. And that's not really the intent here, but the intent is to provide our students, to afford our students more time on site with their teachers in their classroom settings in ways that are safe and healthy. And many of you, the majority of you at the elementary and secondary level, as parents, indicated that's your preference. However, it's also important to note that a percentage of our parents are really comfortable with that virtual model, and it's about 18% virtual voyage here at the elementary level, in addition to another 1% in the PVV virtual model. And then about 15% of our parents don't want to change. They really prefer that half-day model. Over here at the secondary level, the results were very similar. We were up just over 60% of individuals, families that prefer that 5 full days a week schedule. And about 19% or so, again, virtual voyage, PV virtual, just over 1, almost 2%. And then a portion of our families are really comfortable in the hybrid. That is the just right schedule for their child at this point in time. So this information also guides us. This is a summary of some of the results overall to the survey. And we learned also, in addition to preferences right now around schedules, and again, in the survey, I want to mention that we did call out, we are making efforts to maintain that 6 feet of social distancing. I want to mention tonight that if we bring back our high school students in this model, we will not be able to uphold that 6 feet in all classrooms and all settings. And we'll talk more about that as we progress through. About 60% of our families indicated they would rely on PVSD transportation. So of those who responded, 60% indicated they would take the buses. We also get guidance from our teachers. So we learn a lot from those health agencies and the literature. We've learned from our parent community. We also hear from our teachers, and they're really in the trenches right now. And I took some time last week to meet with each building and their staff to present general information, talk about these ideas being presented tonight to the board and to the public, and then also to field questions, concerns, comments. And there is a level of nervousness on the part of many of our teachers. They would really prefer to be vaccinated before we bring more students back into our setting, while others are feeling ready and comfortable and willing to really get back into that 5 full days a week schedule. So again, different schools of thought, varying opinions. I certainly would feel much better if we can have all of our staff vaccinated. And we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks around vaccinations now that there's another vaccine that's been approved and on the market. Teachers definitely want their students back, but they are concerned with upholding safety in the ways that we've been able to do it right now. We've been very strict with our guidelines, and it's really paid off. We've seen very little, 0 to almost none, or I'm sorry, 0 to almost 0 link transmission in our schools. So we've done a nice job that way. The metrics around us are also declining, and we're seeing fewer positive cases of COVID in our school communities among students and staff. We are going to talk a little bit about Empower Days, and they were mentioned at the Education Committee. I would propose that we incorporate a couple of Empower Days as we prepare to bring our students back. And even while our students are back at the secondary level, In some cases, again, our teachers are delivering via this dual model where they are working diligently to pay attention to the students in seats in their classroom as well as those on the Zoom screen. And it's no easy task. It really doesn't afford them the opportunities to engage with students and develop the relationships that they appreciate as they work with students. So those Empower Days will really lend themselves to those sorts of opportunities, as well as some smaller group and individualized remediation or enrichment to some of our students. We are talking about administering a staff survey. I talked about administering a staff survey a few weeks ago, opted instead to start with meetings at the building, to speak face-to-face really. First, I went to each building and invited staff to come to the library or to tune in via Zoom, again, whatever they were most comfortable with. And there wasn't a lot of time for questions or exchange. So I'm going to go back to a couple of buildings. And after some conversation with some of our teachers and follow-up, I think we are going to survey our teachers and ask some questions about our return and ways in which they would feel most effectively supported. Again, this is another change for our teachers. It's another change for our students. It's another change for our families. So how do we most effectively support staff and students transitioning through a potential change? As we think about the procedures and the protocols that we need to uphold and maintain as we bring more students back into the school settings potentially, it's really that Swiss cheese model where we have multiple strategies in place that are upheld, from masking to that physical distancing. We're used to social distancing. Now it's typically referred to as physical distancing. So you'll see me refer to it in both ways, social and physical distancing. Cohorting to the extent possible. So can we create those bubbles, those cohorts of students, so that individuals tend to be with the same individuals as much as possible? We're focused on our ventilation, and we've done some things to really enhance our ventilation systems. And we continue to talk about what else we might do, particularly in those classrooms at the high school that don't have windows. And in working with Mr. Clemmer, we're looking into adding some HEPA filters in those settings. Some of the classrooms at the high school have the bipolar ionization units. The system is fairly updated too. But in some of those classrooms where there aren't windows, we have those bipolar ionization units. Where there are some univents that still exist, Mr. Clemmer is looking into bringing in a HEPA filter, which again enhances the ventilation. If those classrooms can't open their windows, we'd like to provide that as a way to improve and really maximize the capabilities of our ventilation systems. We still focus on cleaning and hand washing. We have hand sanitizer in lots of places throughout all of our buildings. We focus on those high touch surfaces as part of our cleaning protocols and the deep cleaning at the end of every school day. That takes place on our buses too. They're sprayed midday and at the end of the day. We encourage that daily symptom monitoring, that screening of our own health. We don't want people to come to school if they don't feel themselves, if they don't feel well. And that's something we need to continue with. We are looking at a testing strategy or rapid antigen testing. We're right now in conversations about bringing in a rapid antigen testing system where staff could volunteer to take a rapid test 1 day a week in their building. So it would be very convenient to participate. It's a pretty simple test, and they would know within 15 minutes whether or not the test indicates they are positive for COVID or negative. If they're positive, there is a second step that we would ask them to move through that we too would be able to conduct. It's a more sophisticated test, like a PCR test, if you will. And these testing systems are being recommended by CDC. We're excited at the opportunity to continue discussions and maybe bring in that rapid antigen testing to PV. There are school districts in our county that have implemented the rapid antigen testing systems. Another way to proactively mitigate the spread of the virus. And ultimately, we all want vaccinations, or at least the large majority of our staff, when they completed a survey, over 90% indicated they're really in favor of that vaccine and they're looking forward to it. To date, we have individuals in group 1A or phase 1A, if you will, around 200 or so that have been vaccinated with at least one shot. We have 750 total staff. So we're plugging away. We're moving through that and looking forward to more information about when phase 1B, where the majority of educators are listed, will be vaccinated. So anxiously awaiting updates on that information. So again, that physical distancing is really the focus. And we're learning that while 6 feet is optimum right now, we know that in some of the literature and the research, we're realizing that there isn't a significant difference between 4 and 6 feet, even sometimes 3 and 6 feet as people are looking at it. And some of the county health departments around us are making shifts in their guidance around physical distancing. Montgomery County has not done that. They continue to advocate for 6 feet of social distancing to the greatest extent possible. And that's what we're aiming for. And we continue to aim for that. So lots of considerations that I want to call out. Some of the things that our principals are thinking about as we consider bringing back interested elementary and middle level students. We think very much about, again, that multi-layered plan and those mitigating steps that we have in place, those strategies that we've employed. Do we have enough custodial staff to maintain those strict cleaning protocols? Yes, we do. Do we have food service staff to be able to deliver lunch? And we have plans for lunch where students would be assigned seats and our food service staff would deliver their grab and go type lunch to them at their seat, unless, of course, a student packs their lunch. Principals are looking at drop off and pick up and how it would be organized to avoid clustering. Right now, according to the data that we have, there would be lots of parent drop off and pick up. And so they are making arrangements to accommodate that in ways that remain safe in our parking lots. Lunch will afford all students 6 feet of social distancing. So as an administrative team, we are committed to that 6 feet in lunch areas, in eating areas when students would not have their masks on. So while we might see distances a little bit less than 6 feet in classroom settings, in lunch, we're going to maintain that 6 feet of social distancing. And what that means is that in some cases, we have to shift students because there's not enough room in the cafeteria, believe it or not, for, say, for example, an entire grade level in an elementary school. So principals are using some of those empty virtual teacher classrooms to accommodate and rotate through groups that would eat in classrooms once or twice a cycle, again, to spread out and afford all students that 6 feet of social distancing, as well as the adults that monitor in those areas. The same is true at the middle level, where they will spread out into the gym, potentially the stage, and maybe even outside. That's something that we're talking a lot about. Do we have our students bring a beach towel and have it at school regularly so that we can get outside as much as possible? This is being recommended by some of our guiding agencies. So can we take our students outside to eat? So we are accommodating serving lunch and providing lunch in ways that will afford 6 feet of social distancing in our buildings. At the high school, we would open up the auxiliary gym and it would become another space for students to eat lunch at desks, in rows, 6 feet apart, facing forward. So really keeping that protocol very strict in those eating areas. Students at the elementary level will go out for recess with their masks, and principals will transition them by first designating zones by classroom teachers. So again, try and maintain that cohort model as we move through getting students back in school 5 full days a week. As the metrics continue to decline and the incidence rates continue to decline, as well as the vaccinations or vaccinated individuals increase, there is the possibility and the potential for relaxing that a little bit. However, to start, this is what's being proposed. We'd also like to rejuvenate an effort to recruit parent volunteers for all levels, to assist with lunch and recess. And in our current health and safety plan, we have set aside our parent volunteers and really any individuals coming into the building that aren't typically a part of the building for at least the first semester. And we were going to revisit that in January. Or for the second half of the year. So I am proposing we change that in our health and safety plan and we allow for parent volunteers. We know we have lots of parents that want to support in some way. We'd like to take them up on that. And these are some ways that we would really capitalize on some supports in all of our buildings, lunch duty, recess duty. In our buildings at the elementary level, we will maintain the I&E times. And of course, at all levels, if we shift to this schedule, special education services will continue. At the elementary level and the middle level, there is a focus on movement breaks for our students. Again, they're coming back to school for a full day potentially. They're thinking about our principals, our leadership team is thinking about how to incorporate those movement breaks. That will be a change. We are looking forward to field day, which is really a specialized sort of field day this year. It's not the typical field day. And our phys ed teachers at the elementary level are planning something for those students. We're also looking at the 5th grade celebration being proposed, possibilities for middle school and 8th grade celebration of sorts. These would need approval from the Office of Public Health, Mrs. Pam Lawn. She oversees approval for events like this. Again, students would be masked, social distancing would be maintained, and cleaning and hygiene would be a focus as well. So more to come on those, but our principals are thinking about, as our home and school officers, what they can do for all students, not just the students that attend on site, but our virtual students. What can we do to conclude the year on a real positive note, potentially, with some of those activities that we look forward to each year, those milestone activities. We're also planning parent information sessions, and our principals would like to hold some this week to talk more about these details in a more intimate manner with their elementary parents. Middle school principals are doing the same. They're planning parent information sessions to inform parents of the details of what the experience will be like for their child coming back into school 5 full days a week in the event they have questions about that. And again, we know it's going to look different. So our principals are also preparing a survey. They need to learn the commitments to 5 full days per week, or whether our families would prefer to remain 100% virtual for the remaining weeks of the school year. So these are some of the considerations that are at the forefront of what our principals are working on. And this is an example of an elementary survey that's been drafted. Principals would really like to get this out sooner rather than later so that they can begin to analyze the data and figure out, particularly at the elementary level, who might need to switch where. If virtual families prefer to be on site, we need to take that into consideration, just as those half-day students who may prefer to be 100% virtual for the rest of the year. We need to take that into consideration. And we've talked before about those classes being pretty full, very few spots available that won't, that will keep us within those class size recommendations that we follow. Just some pictures of what our classrooms look like with desks 6 feet apart. Gives you a sense. These are elementary school classrooms. And at the high school, the way the data has been analyzed, and this is a somewhat complicated slide, but I want to give you a sense of how Dr. Moss and her team are figuring out how many desks could fit in a particular classroom. So what Dr. Moss has done is, in column G, she has looked at the number of seats based on the students that would attend if all of the hybrid students came back to school. That's about 1,000 students for the high school. And we maintain that 6 feet of social distancing. So for example, in this class right here, this is a teacher here. In this class where there's a red bar in column G with a circle around it, we're 2 seats short of being able to keep every student that's scheduled for that classroom 6 feet apart. If we go to 5 feet, we can do it and have 3 extra. If we go to 4 feet, we can do it and have 8 extra seats. So Dr. Moss has really analyzed at the level of each class based on the enrollments and what they would look like with, again, approximately 1,000 students in attendance. There will be, right now, according to her data, and again, this is based on 1,000 students. Again, that's all of our hybrid students folding in to be full-time. There's one class where students would be 3 feet apart. All others would be 4 or 5 feet apart, excuse me, again, based on that approximation. If 1,600 students come back of the 1,800 enrolled, it's going to be a different story. So again, another reason why our principals want to do those surveys again, where if we have more direction, we get a specific commitment from our parents to know what those numbers are and then what the circumstances will be in each classroom. So I want to also make sure that I inform all of the increased close contacts we anticipate. And right now, when you hear about a positive case in our schools, you'll often also read that there were no close contacts. That's because nobody was within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more of that positive person. And that's because of our health and safety plan and all of the mitigating strategies within it being upheld, being employed. Now, the prediction is if we go back to this slide and hypothetically we have kids 5 feet apart or 4 feet apart, whether it's at the high school and in a couple of cases at the middle school, 5 feet would really support the middle school. They're aiming for 6. 5 feet would make it easier for them as well in some of their classroom settings. We will have more close contacts if there's a positive case of COVID because we're closer than that 6 feet, most likely for more than 15 minutes. So what that means is more students will be asked to quarantine. And I want to make sure that all are aware of that downside, if you will, of at times relaxing on that 6 feet of social distancing. There are more close contacts. Now, some wonder if the definition of close contacts is going to also shift as we're seeing more and more in the literature, possibilities for shifting that social distancing. It hasn't happened yet. So we need to know that if there is a positive case, there will most likely be close contacts and those students will have to quarantine the specified number of days. At the elementary level, they will be assigned asynchronous work. We're not going to entertain that dual delivery model as we did in a temporary manner after the holidays. At the secondary level, they will Zoom in as they do now on their off-site days or their remote days. But please know that we anticipate, and we've heard this from other schools around us that have more students in, we anticipate a greater number of students being obligated to quarantining in response to a positive case and being a close contact. Busing and lunch procedures, I talked a little bit about lunch. Buses will remain capped at 44 students. That's a CDC guideline, and no more than 2 per seat. And with a sibling, if they have to sit, if they can join with a sibling, that's what's recommended. We don't have anywhere near 44 students on our buses right now, and we're uncertain as to how close we'll get to that if we do implement this new schedule. So again, that's something that needs to be analyzed once we get our survey data. We continue to recommend windows be cracked. Again, based on the weather, presuming the weather cooperates. Students are masked at all times, or expected to be masked at all times. In the lunchroom, students will stand in line 6 feet apart, the middle school and the high school levels. And again, this is a picture of the high school cafeteria. We've shown this in past presentations. We have relied upon desks because they can or easily be situated 6 feet apart facing forward. And that right now is the recommended and safest way to engage in eating. We'll maintain that 6 feet in all eating areas at any level and use those extra spaces I mentioned a few minutes ago. Just today, we learned from the Pennsylvania Department of Health that they have lifted the travel restrictions. So while they certainly encourage us all to practice appropriate public health measures if we travel out of Pennsylvania and return, there's no longer the requirement to get tested or to quarantine. So those restrictions were just lifted today. So that's hot off the press. So as we think about moving to that 5 full days, we refer to the CDC guidance and we look to those metrics. Again, they're not absolute or considered absolute anymore, but they do provide guidance to us. And right now, we're straddling the moderate and the substantial with the metrics that we're looking at. The most recent metrics around incidence were just over 100 or right around 100 per 100,000 residents in Montgomery County, and a percent positivity of 6 as of last Thursday. Still trending downward overall. Those are strong metrics relative to where we were over the winter holidays. So for us, we consider what the CDC is recommending. And that's helping us know how to get into school and to support the recommendation to bring students back on site 5 full days. What will cause us pause and prompt us to think about shifting back to these blended models? Well, this particular chart over here, this column on the right, points out some of the criteria that we might look to. Again, those incidence rates, that's what the CDC recommends. If you get over 100, per 100,000, and we were well over 200 at times, then we need to pay attention to that. If we get a percent positivity rate that's equal to or greater than 10%, we need to pay attention to that. If we start to see linked transmission in our schools, and this is really critical, we need to pay attention to that and serious attention to that. We continue to look to the Office of Public Health, CHOP, and Policy Lab. Dr. David Rubin is a well-known voice in our area for providing guidance to school districts, to the CDC, and of course the literature for what they would recommend. We want to make sure that we're not lacking in PPE. If we're running low on PPE, that needs to have our attention. We need to pay attention to that. And of course, we want to make sure we have staff and transportation drivers to support all students. So if we get into a situation where we have insufficient staff or struggle to transport and run all of our buses, then again, we need to consider what's best for the school district and our students in those cases. So these factors will be considered together again to develop that larger picture. Individual data points we're learning really shouldn't be considered as absolutes, but instead as part of a bigger picture. So what are we doing next? What happens after tonight? I certainly welcome any questions from our Board of School Directors. Some of the thinking that's also happening simultaneous to coming in tonight with this presentation, our principals are preparing parent informational sessions at the elementary and middle level. And this was suggested at our task force last week. I thought it was a great idea, a parent panel that would be comprised of parents whose children are enrolled or participating in that virtual instruction model and what the experience has been like for them. In the event we have some families that would prefer a shift to that, and vice versa. Maybe some of our virtual families would like to hear from some of our on-site families. So we'd like to organize a parent panel to afford parents the opportunity to hear from one another about the instructional models. We are working on a parent survey and really need to administer that as soon as we are able, looking for a rapid return date to really drill down and know the numbers and the commitments of our families in the event this recommendation moves forward. And we can bring our students back, those that are interested in coming back 5 full days each week. With that parent survey information, we will analyze students and sections and whether or not there's any necessary changes. And again, trying very hard not to have any student change his or her teacher. And that's really at the elementary level where this pertains. In the event a virtual student comes on site, they're going to need to change teachers, excuse me. And again, if the opposite happens, a half-day student or an on-site student opts to shift to virtual. Again, because we have those separate standalone virtual teachers at the elementary level, there will be a change in teacher assignment with a change like that. We'd like to know to what extent, what's the potential for those changes? And another survey that provides us an answer from each of our families for every student will help us to know that. And then our principals can plan accordingly. At the middle and high school levels, not as critical because, again, our teachers at those levels are delivering in that dual mode. They're delivering instruction at the same time to students in their class as they are to students on the Zoom screen. We need to analyze busing detail. So again, working on the busing detail, the survey results will help us to be able to do that. And we're organizing our classroom spaces, our building spaces. What do we need to do in our cafeterias? In some cases, we're bringing in desks to cafeteria spaces. We're moving desks into gyms to serve as cafeteria spaces. So that work is being planned and conducted right now. And we continue to pursue that rapid antigen testing. And we're having conversations with teacher leaders and hopefully looking forward to a commitment and some training to be able to bring that in as, again, another mitigating step we can take. We continue to advocate for vaccinations for all educators, all staff in the educational organization. We'll monitor the metrics, of course, and any updates that come out about COVID and stay informed. And in closing, it really has been a long year. And it was a year ago this month that we shifted how we're doing school, if you will, here in Perkiomen Valley. I just want to take a moment to thank all that have participated directly in delivering school services, our administrative team, our teachers who every day are really working diligently to meet the needs of students in very unusual and challenging ways, our support staff, and our custodial food service individuals who really provide services that are necessary and much appreciated by our students and our staff. So just a word of thanks. And with that, I will take any questions that individuals on the board may have.
Do you want to call on folks, Dr. Russell, or do you want me to moderate, or you? Want me to?
Okay.
There's 4 hands up.
Okay. And I'm sorry, Dr. Hallis, I did not see the order of the hands. I don't know if you know that.
I sort of do. I think it was Dr. Kolar who's first and then Mrs. Lofton. So Dr. Kolar, if you want to go ahead first, please.
Sure. I have kind of a 2-part question regarding the secondary level. You had mentioned a phased in approach. So I was wondering what was the rationale behind phasing in by grade level rather than everybody at once. And if that is what we're committed to, then does it make sense to maybe flip it around and possibly offer the seniors the first date back in and maybe at the middle school 8th grade? Because it seems to me that the senior families are, really wanting to get back in there and feel like they've had the most to lose in this situation.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Dr. Kolar. I'm going to go back to that slide. That has been brought up by others, and I think it's something that others understand, and we can absolutely consider a shift like that for those reasons. We flip-flop. There's been a lot of concern about 9th graders too. However, we've heard from our seniors and our senior parents that they really long to be back in the building. So we can consider that 8th graders were in after 6th graders too, which was another point that was raised to me. So we can shift the order and bring back those upper grade levels first, again, to maximize the experience for them and rotate those. And we're phasing them in really just to make sure that we have everything in place and it is set up in the way that it needs to be to support our kids, which is why we've opted not to bring everybody at the middle level back at once. At the elementary level, we would have liked to have done the same thing. However, we can't operate on that half-day model at the same time we operate the full-day model. So the phasing in can apply and be put into practice at the middle level. And we can certainly think about switching the upper grades so that they come in first.
So then just to kind of make sure I'm clear with the phasing in, the grades that don't come in those first few days, would they be fully virtual?
Yes, they would. Yes. So they would maintain much of what they're doing on those days they're not on site. That's correct. Yeah. Mrs. Lofton.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. So I would agree with Dr. Kolar's point. We've certainly been hearing a lot of concern from our senior families about getting the seniors back. And I think that that is something that we would want to prioritize, and perhaps the 8th graders as well. I do have questions about the classrooms where we could be over or forced to go under the 6-foot distance at the high school. So with some of the information that was shared with the board last week, it was indicated that there was one classroom at the middle school level that would be under 6 feet, but there were solutions proposed, such as differentiated instruction, where a small group of those students could be getting differentiated instruction elsewhere, and that could rotate through so that the classroom could be kept at 6 feet. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of a creative solution like that, you know, if we are not comfortable going to 3 feet at the high school for that one class, or, you know, if there's a couple classes that are going to be really tight like that, can there be some sort of differentiated instruction, or can people have, you know, since there's going to be the hybrid option or the virtual option will continue to be offered for those classrooms, could it be, you know, one day a week you're in this class and you're on site, but you're participating virtually from another location, so that we can keep those classrooms at the spacing that we decide is appropriate. You know, I would like to, you know, just, I think as I shared before, I would hate to see this not move forward because of one classroom. And I would hope that we can find, you know, if there is one or two really difficult classrooms, I would think that there could be some sort of a creative solution that would allow us to still move forward with some type of a plan that better meets the needs of the students who, you know, are really seeking that full-time experience, but also allows us to keep a spacing that we are comfortable with. My next question is, you know, since we did not get a complete response to the survey last time, I guess what's confusing to me is the survey was sent out and you had to answer for each child. So we should already know what each child wants to do to a certain extent. How are we going to make sure we're going to get that information in the next in less than 3 weeks, or really if we don't approve this till next week, in 2 weeks, to flip this around that quickly? And then I'm going to have one more question after that.
So to answer that question, that's something that our principals have been focused on. They would actually like to administer a survey this week, and it's essentially asking 2 questions. Again, the hybrid comes away, the half-day model comes away. I think that pulled away from some of the results in the survey as to what would you do if there only were these 2 choices. It was important for us to get a sense of how many people really appreciate the half-day and the hybrid models. However, if we're going to move this plan forward, now we need to know which way would you go and feel most comfortable going.
Okay.
In or virtual, and principals will actually contact families that don't respond. They're going to send the surveys out from their buildings so that it's a bit more intimate with their school communities. And the parent information sessions that they would like to hold, they hope will also help to communicate the fact that we want a survey response from every single family.
Okay. Okay. And so we are anticipating having the results of those surveys by our meeting next week.
They would like that. You know, I want to be sure the board's comfortable with us administering a survey. They would like to administer a survey tomorrow and have it due
Okay.
by Saturday so that they can begin to analyze the data. So they want to have a couple of parent sessions actually this week as well to be
Okay.
able to entertain questions and make sure they bring clarity to parents about what this experience will be like either way they may go.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, I would be in full support of making sure that we are getting all the data that we need to make a fully informed decision. The other question I have relates to the senior career study, and it was my impression from some information that was shared last week that that was being envisioned as a fully virtual experience. And I'm curious if that is indeed the case, or if there's also going to be in-person opportunities for that.
I don't know if Mrs. Smith, if you're available to speak to that at all. I know we've been looking into that and considering what might be possible as we engaged in the conversation with high school admin and staff.
Okay.
Yes,
Well-
I can chime in, Dr.
That
Russell.
would be great. Thank you.
And I just forwarded some information to you, Dr. Russell, regarding this exact topic. I spoke to Mrs. Colucci at the high school, and she did indicate that in the past, our career study programming has been off-site for our seniors. So, however, for this year, while many of the activities may be virtual, there will be some opportunities for students to come on site, maybe in small groups in the library or some of the different activities. And she's also exploring opportunities to partner up or bring small groups of students together that they can collaborate together. So we're trying to find some opportunities to have them on site and be able to be in the buildings, but there will be some virtual experiences as well.
So I guess my question to that is, in the past, it was off-site because students were job shadowing. So of course they were off-site because they were at a place of business. The way it's been redesigned for this year involves essentially classes. And so I'm not sure why, if we're shifting to a full-time, or discussing shifting to a full-time in-person experience, why we would be designing the last 2 weeks of our seniors experience to be almost fully virtual.
So some of the activities that we're offering are actually in partnership with other organizations that we're providing them remotely from their locations. So that's part of why some of them may need to be. But I do meet with Mrs. Colucci this week regarding this and a couple other topics, so I can get more information to share in the board memo and see if we can increase our on-site opportunities.
Because we had talked about potentially renting some tents or something so that there could be outdoor on-site ways for students to be with each other, but participate in these programs. And so I'm curious, I know Dr. Russell, you said you had done some research on tent rentals, and where does that stand?
So we have some prices for, in particular, we were looking at tents at this point for East as we take over the gym space for either classes or cafeteria eating. Dr. Clune is proposing some tents outside for phys ed classes when the weather isn't nice, when it's rainy or they need shelter or would benefit from it. And they appear to be available from a company in Lidditz that we've researched. We're still looking at some other companies, and we could probably get, I think we were looking at 2 20 by 40 tents, and I'll say it's around $10,000 for the rest of the year to get those tents. They also have a 20 by 80 tent available, and they have a 20 by 60, only one left of those. So this particular company has some of these tents left, and we're looking into possibilities even of expanding to a tent outside of the lunchroom at the high school. However, we need to talk to Mr. Felty because that'll take some field space. So we have to figure out how we navigate that and provide everybody with what they need. But the tents are possibilities. You know, they seem to be available, at least from this one company, and we're looking at others.
Thank you. Yeah, just as a corollary to that, I would hope that we would be prioritizing our students' education, and we do have some fantastic new athletic fields that we can use over and over and over again. So I would hope that we would be able to make the adjustments that we need to provide the education to our students.
Yeah, point well taken. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I
So
think,
if you're not sure, Dr. Russell, it was Mr. Dorr, Ms. McGovern, and then Dr. Weston.
thank you, Dr. Hallis. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dr. Hallis. A lot of my questions were already answered, Dr. Russell, but I understand you spent the last month traveling throughout Montgomery County, visiting some of the schools. And I know I've read in some of the literature and also heard from some of the teachers in the area that we're seeing it become more of a gold standard of 3 feet between students, but 6 feet between students and staff. I'm just wondering if whether you or Meg Lewis can speak to that. It seems that there's proof that there's no transmission at that rate between students. I just wanted to hear your thoughts.
I can share with you the school districts that I'm familiar with. I have visited a few, and we are headed to Springford this week just to visit again at all levels their operations. So in Souderton, they've been operating at a 3 to 6 feet of social distancing. That's been their guideline. Quakertown is the same. And they've had very little link transmission. They've had their share of positive cases, and they've had many more students quarantine in Souderton because of the way, again, they handle quarantine. Quarantines are handled a little bit differently in some school districts of Bucks County. However, there has not been a lot of link transmission in either of those school settings. At Wissahickon, the elementary students have been back, but they're aiming for 6 feet. And in most cases, they've been able to uphold that. At Upper Dublin, elementary has been back. They have not been 6 feet and very little, if any, link transmission. North Penn just went back and Upper Merion just went back. And again, they were aiming for 6 feet, but at Upper Merion, they're not going to be able to maintain it. Now, they haven't been back very long at the secondary level. They've been back longer at the elementary level, and they have not seen linked transmission, significant linked transmission. Springford has been back at the elementary level since November. They're 6 feet apart. Their secondary level is closer to 4 to 6 feet apart. Now, they've had to close some schools. They were following the attestation form and those thresholds that were originally called out. That has since changed with the updates as of January 28th, and schools are no longer obligated to close down if they have that certain number of positives, and instead they are obligated to have a conversation with the Office of Public Health and follow their guidance. So it's not a hard and fast rule. So we are in some different places in Montgomery County. More schools are considering bringing more students on site more frequently. Lower Moreland and Springfield Township are also working simultaneous to some of the work that we're doing. And Upper Dublin is planning to bring back their high school students in early April. So more and more schools are considering these steps. And again, as we learn about some of the data that's emerging around social distancing, they're feeling more comfortable doing so, aiming for 6, but realizing there's not a significant difference. As long as all those other mitigating steps are taken, there's not a significant difference if we go less than 6. Ms.
Thank you.
McGovern? Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I just had a quick question. You had mentioned that a lot of the teachers, and I'm sure a lot of people, would feel more comfortable returning to a full 5-day-a-week model if the teachers are vaccinated and staff. Do we have an estimated number on how many teachers and staff could be or will be vaccinated before March 22nd?
Well, of the 200 or so that we're aware of, I don't have the breakdown of how many of those individuals are teachers. Mr. Moran might. That's a good question. Some of them are support staff, some of them are paraprofessionals, some of them work in food service or custodial staff, if you will. So the breakdown is one that I do not know, but Mr. Moran might be able to provide that. However, of 750 total staff, we are at about 200 right now, total, that have had at least one dose.
And we're not expecting that to increase that much in the next 3 to 2 weeks, right?
We are anticipating an increase if Skip Back Pharmacy comes back and uses our facility, that we may be able to vaccinate the remaining 1A individuals in our district. Not 100% certain of that, but we are aiming for that. That's about 40, I think, people. And then we'll have to see what happens with respect to educators at large and that phase 1B group now that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been approved. And we're anxiously awaiting updates on what may be when it comes to more of a full-scale vaccination effort for teachers and educators.
Okay, thank you. And then, oops, sorry. I just had one more quick question. So it sounds like we're asking parents to commit to one or the other model. So if we were to continue in this mode, I'm assuming that would be their model for the rest of the year. But if we were to continue with the traditional model, would we still be asking supposedly next year, and maybe this is looking too far into the future, but would we still be asking on a marking period basis about their model, or would it be the same kind of commitment we're looking for this spring?
That's a really good question, and I'm glad you brought that up. Dr. Moss has some ideas for when she would like to recommend there be opportunities for individuals to shift, if that would be their preference. You know, it helps the high school where it's a much more complicated system to have a good sense of when students are going to be on site versus when they're going to be virtual. So we have talked about possibilities for making a shift and offering parents that opportunity. So it's not necessarily for the rest of the year. I would imagine at the elementary level, it'll be very stable in that regard. But at the middle and high school, there may be opportunities provided where we can make a change. So we are still talking through some of those dates, those possibilities.
Okay. And ultimately, if enough students this spring say, enough currently virtual students say that they would like to come back and this isn't possible, we'd be maintaining the hybrid model, correct?
You know, we haven't really drawn that conclusion yet. We're feeling like we want to believe we could host those that are interested in coming back. And again, we need the numbers to determine that, to then see what those classroom capacities look like, the lunchroom capacities look like. So we haven't really stated or articulated that conclusion. So stay tuned as we know more and those numbers come back and maybe really are way different or far from what we project. That may be a conclusion, but right now it's not. We would like people to commit to school in the way that we know it, 5 full days in, or that fully virtual.
Okay, thank you so much.
You bet. Dr. Weston.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to say, thank you for a terrific presentation here. I'm very, very pleased, very excited to see this. We've been experiencing this situation for a year now. It's probably the longest year I've ever experienced. I think any of us have ever experienced, but I feel like we're in a situation where we really can start to move on now and learn to move forward while dealing with this situation and this virus. I wanted to comment further, adding on to what Mr. Dorr said about the distancing. You and I have talked about this, and I've mentioned this in meetings before, that I really hope that we can see our way clear to accepting less than 6 feet of social distancing between our students and our teachers and staff. The preponderance of evidence that I've seen, the studies that I've seen, all seem to support the idea that a shorter distance is acceptable. I've not seen anything yet that really says that 6 feet is superior to 3 feet distancing in helping to prevent the spread of virus. So, like I say, I'm glad to see that it's acknowledged that in the high school we may not be able to accomplish 6 feet and we would still move forward. But I really hope that we'll continue to scrutinize 3 feet and 6 feet and try to get to the point where we're comfortable with lesser distancing than 6 feet. The other thing I'm thinking about is, as we're coming back, until the vaccine is more widely available, it's going to be really important to do everything we can to keep the virus out of the buildings. If there's no virus in the buildings to spread, it can't spread amongst our students and our faculty. So one of the things that we've been doing, and I want to note, are we still doing this? Are we asking for daily symptom reporting, self-screening of students and staff for symptoms prior to coming in the building? Are people being good about that? Are they staying home if they are experiencing any kind of symptoms? Or have we seen anybody coming in and it's apparent when they get to the building that they really should have stayed at home? Are we being good about the compliance with self-reporting?
So I'll let Mrs. Lewis chime in a little bit too. I think we're being fairly diligent about symptom monitoring. I think overall people have COVID on their mind, and so they're self-assessing pretty frequently, particularly when they're aware of positive cases. It hasn't been perfect. However, we continue to review it with our staff, reinforce it with our staff. We don't have people, adults in our community anymore, symptom monitor daily. They instead signed off on an acknowledgement form. And periodically we have conversations and we revisit the topic and prompt them to do so. With our student athletes, I believe they are conducting a daily symptom monitoring. Is that correct, Mrs. Lewis?
That is correct, Dr. Russell. They are the one group that continues to report daily before practice or before a game for symptom monitoring.
But adults, we shifted away from that to that acknowledgement form and asked them to commit to it while continuing to have conversations about it so that it remained somewhere close to the forefront of their thinking.
Right. And we also asked the parents as well to sign off on that commitment. And, we received those forms back as well. So it is definitely in the forefront of, the majority of our population, our community's minds. And they, I feel they're very cooperative with that.
That's really good to hear that this is being taken really seriously, and it would be good, I think, as we're getting back in the weeks leading up to coming back to school, that this is reinforced with people, because like I said, keep the virus out of the building, and the other things fall into place. The other thing I'll say is that I really hope that we are able to start implementing a testing protocol for our faculty and staff on a voluntary basis. I think this is another very useful tool for helping to keep the virus out of the building. And if we can extend it into students as well, I think I'd look at ways to do that as well. But I think, keep symptom monitoring, symptom reporting, testing. I think those are two essential tools to help us keep the schools virus free going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weston. And if you don't mind, you prompted me to think of something that I had wanted to mention at a good time. And that really is, not only do we want our staff and students to stay on top of that symptom monitoring, that daily symptom monitoring, but I would encourage our community members to do the same. So while the county metrics are trending downward, our local metrics are too. However, they're a little bit higher than our county metrics are right now. So it really does take all of us working together and thinking about how we mitigate the spread of this virus that will protect us all and really support having more students back in school more frequently. So that's an opportunity for me to also encourage not only our staff and students, all of us in the school settings, to think about our own health, but those in the community and what we can do to avoid the spread of the virus. So thank you.
So I'm sorry, Dr. Russell, I don't have a hand raising function. Can you go back to Dr. Moss's slide for the high school? Sorry, yeah. And then I'm just curious that, and because obviously we're only seeing a small part of the picture, if for the, if we did go from 6 feet to 5 feet, how many of those total red bars disappear? Do we know? Oh, you're muted, Dr. Russell. Sorry.
Sorry, thank you. I don't know that off the hand, but I can tell you that, and I can share a more expansive view of what that looks like at the high school if you're interested in that. You can see that you're right. This is just a snapshot, a small section with some teachers. I mean, we have a science classroom, we have a special ed classroom, we have a Spanish classroom here, we have an English classroom. It's a sprinkling, it's a diverse representation. I can let you know how that number changes.
I'm just curious because as people are concerned about those distancing questions, if we're talking about going from 6 to 5 feet and the majority or a vast majority of those red bars disappear, it just helps to build a consensus. And then I don't know whether you want to talk a little bit about too, just to help people understand what safety and operations is done, or I can do it, of just that we track all that PPE through safety and operations. And Mr. Weaver actually comes up with an Excel chart where we can tell you not only how many bottles of, say, hand sanitizer we have, but he has it broken down to the bottle size. So I think it's important for people to understand that we really have gone into that much detail to really try and understand operationally what our resources are and what we can do. And the same thing with ventilation, that the standard is 4 to 6 air changes per hour. And we have some parts of our buildings that go as high as 13.88 per hour.
Correct.
So it's other ones, less than that, but all of them, if I remember correctly, all of them exceed that air change exchange per hour requirement.
That's correct. At least 6. Yes.
So I just mentioned these because I think it's important that people understand kind of how deep into the weeds we got to really try and figure this stuff out. So that's all.
Correct. Thank you. Yes. Any other questions at this point from the board? I do appreciate the questions. I appreciate the feedback in supporting some of the organization of the information. I look forward to any follow-up questions and happy to provide additional information. So thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, that brings us to item 1.05, comments on any topic. Just so folks are aware, and we may not have that many comments at this point at all, but it is now 7:45 and we are on item 1.05. So I think just because of the large size of the agenda, I'm going to limit public comments to 45 minutes at most. And we may not even get there, but just in case, just because we have so much more we have to get through this evening. With that, Mr. Ganesh, I'm not sure. Well, actually, Mr. I'm not sure I'm saying his name right. Mr. Boder, Bougchter. I know he was first in line, so if you kindly unmute him and allow him to comment.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I actually want to commend Dr. Russell for meeting with me face-to-face over some concerns I've had. However, I've continued to ask the same question to the board for probably a couple weeks, and I continue to be ignored. So I figured I would come on this meeting and try to get some clarification. So I understand that this plan is a multi-layered plan full of mitigation steps recommended by the CDC in order to get the kids back into school safely. But what I don't understand is why none of these multi-layered mitigation steps are being considered when you're approving basketball and wrestling to take place at all levels. Also, given the fact that the CDC specifically recommends that those two events are high risk as far as the transmission of the virus. I sat here and listened to every single one of you express how important it is to be 6 feet apart and not to have close contacts. When if you go to a basketball game or a wrestling match, you see that none of the students, and I don't blame them, I blame the adults who are making these decisions, but none of the students are following any of these multi-layered mitigation steps because they're playing a high level intensity sport. And if you listen to what the CDC says, and I quote, participation in extracurricular activities in sports may also increase the risk of transmission of the virus among students, teachers, and staff. Intense exercise causes these participants to breathe heavily, yada, yada, yada. So if you're telling me that you're worried about the students going back to school and the spread of the virus, how can you approve something that's high risk? And it's not just to the students who are participating, the family members, the coaches who are all adults there. And I understand you say like the daily symptom checks, but most of the younger generation have been asymptomatic. So for you to say that, I go back to what I said in the email, that you're just being ignorant. And for Mr. Weston, who just said, we need to do everything that we can do to keep the virus out of the building. Well, if that's the case, then how can we promote something that's high risk, more than one thing that's high risk, but yet not promote something that's low risk, such as the students sitting in their desk and just taking instructions? So I still haven't gotten a good answer to that. I will wait, and I probably will still get ignored because your administrators just continue to hide behind emails and Zoom meetings, and you don't answer the questions that are pertinent and that are reasonable. So I can see I'm out of time. All I get is 3 minutes. You guys get to talk for hours, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ganesh, if you kindly unmute Mr. Geddes, I believe is how you say it, Geddes.
Mr. Geddes?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening. I just had a question. More regards, and maybe it's a comment also, regarding the if there's a possible spread or when you're contact tracing. I have a lot of experience with, the facility that I work at is healthcare facility. And so when we do our contract tracing, when we find people who have potential exposure, we do tell them that they need to stay home. But what we've been doing through the guidance of the county health department is if they can, I believe it's within 5 days, provide 2 negative rapid tests, they're able to come back. Now, I'm not saying that that should be the model for the district. I'm just suggesting that maybe you look into it so that we're not pushing kids out for 2 weeks at a time. Maybe we can truncate the quarantining schedule so that if they're if they are listed as a potential contact, that we do get them out, we keep them out of school, but then we can develop a time period and say, all right, well, within this time period, whether it's 5, 6, 7 days, we say you need to get tested twice, and it has to be spread apart by a minimum of 3 days, because generally speaking, if you're going to test positive, it's within the first 3 to 5 days. And so what we do at our facility is on the 5th day, we have them do another test. And, we're doing all the different mitigation strategies that you guys discussed already. So I was just wondering if that's something that you guys can start, looking at and potentially in some way, shape, or form incorporate. But that was my suggestion / question. and I can cede the rest of my time.
Thank you. And I forgot to remind folks that as you speak, if you could also, besides stating your name, please give your municipality, or if you're a district employee, the building that you work in. And with that, Mr. Ganesh, if you could kindly unmute Mr. McGill, please.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Bill McGill and I live in Perkiomen Township. I also serve as the union president for the Perkiomen Valley Teachers. First, I would like to thank the board members for their volunteer service to our community and for doing what is best for our school community. PV got it right when we opened school in the fall of 2020 for in-person student learning because the board was committed to social distancing of 6 feet between students, mask wearing, and cleaning protocols. Because of this commitment, PV never had to close a school or quarantine a class or a group of students due to school spread. Our COVID-19 mitigation efforts worked. The PV teachers have never demanded that schools be closed during the pandemic as other districts have done, and the PV teachers have been and are committed to teaching our students in a safe environment. As we talk about transitioning students back to full days of in-person instruction, the teachers ask that it be done safely and backed by science. As stated in Dr. Russell's presentations in each building last week, the CDC still recommends 6 feet of social distancing. In addition, the Montgomery County Office of Public Health still recommends social distancing at 6 feet between individuals. Teachers are skeptical that the 6 feet of social distancing can be maintained while providing a student-centered learning environment. A lot of questions need to be answered in a very short period of time. Will large furniture need to be removed from classrooms? Will students be able to see the board? What happens when a classroom is unable to fit all the students? What is the plan for the lunchrooms at every level? How many people can truly fit in a classroom and maintain a distance of 6 feet? Hopefully the board will receive answers to these questions and tour the school buildings before making a decision on this issue. At this time, obtaining a COVID-19 vaccination for teachers is a priority. The Philadelphia School District was able to secure vaccines for its teachers. It is perplexing how Philadelphia was able to vaccinate the majority of its teachers, yet the suburban schools are unable to accomplish this. To date, only about a quarter of the PV teaching staff have been vaccinated. Vaccinating school personnel to ensure the safety of all should be a top priority. In conclusion, PV got it right in the fall when students returned and maintained a standard of 6 feet of social distancing. So let PV get it right again. When we increase on-site instruction for students, we ask that the district adhere to the CDC recommendation of 6 feet when social distancing. Lastly, please see what can be done to get our school personnel vaccinated. Thank you for listening, and thank you for what you do to keep our entire school community safe during this pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. McGill. Mr. Ganesh, if you could kindly unmute Dr. Seibel, please.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michelle Seibel, and I'm a resident of Perkiomen Township, and I have 2 children, one at the high school and one at Evergreen. So I do appreciate the plan that's laid out. I mean, it's clear that a lot of work has gone into it. There were a couple of issues I wanted to bring up. There have been a number of studies that show that it takes these multiple strategies to mitigate the burden of the virus to open schools safely, but this relies on a percentage of students remaining virtual, as well as adherence and compliance to guidelines, and that these expectations are clearly communicated to all stakeholders. Regarding the physical distancing, there are some studies, I would not say an abundance, but there are some that reveal that in cases where subjects were appropriately masked, the risk of transmission was fairly equal and fairly low, somewhere around 0.5% at both 6 feet and 3 feet. But I think there's a couple of issues. One, that the distance should be defined whether hip to hip or nose to nose. We also have to remember that these studies are rigorous and performed under very specific circumstances. So it's important to look at the overall study and follow those guidelines and not pick the desirable methods and outcomes from multiple studies to suit the narrative. My first concern is Specifically, at the beginning of the school year, there was a concern with masking, and from members of our community that were already looking to work around wearing a mask, as well as using face coverings that do not follow universal mask guidance. For example, face shields without a mask underneath and gaiters. For this plan to be implemented and for it to be consistent with a safe return and maintain, there needs to be a universal mask guidance. I would caution against wavering from these guidelines. We need these guidelines followed and in place to assure the highest level of safety for students, teachers, and staff. We know what happens when there is a failure, and that isn't an option. The CDC recommendation and the CHOP policy lab does allow for less rigidity in the distancing, but it is also in alignment with community incidence and percent positivity. I'd also be interested in seeing written protocols that clearly delineate quarantine and isolation protocols, as well as guidelines that place students and teachers in a position that it's not punitive should they need to quarantine and isolate. And lastly, I recommend that this transition back to school, whether now or in the fall or in a few months, be met with additional student and teacher preparation, perhaps a video walkthrough of what these classrooms look like for each grade level and what the expectations are for parents and for students. Everyone in each building needs to hear the same consistent message as to what is expected when they cross the threshold into our Perkiomen Valley School District buildings, from physical, emotional, and behavioral requirements. Remember, while many students have done well, we know some have struggled, and we also know that students, teachers, and staff who've lost a loved one and face this return to school will face a potential trigger for stress, panic, and other issues. So, these are my concerns. I know that there's so much to be covered, but I think as we move forward, even though in those short 3 weeks, I would like to see this addressed before any further surveys. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Seibel. Mr. Ganesh, if you could kindly unmute Mrs. Stone, please.
Hi, my name's Betsy Stone. I am a resident of Skippack Township. I have a daughter at Middle School East and a daughter at the high school. I appreciated the presentation that Dr. Russell put on. The only thing I would like to say as a parent is that she had mentioned about the parent information sessions and as well as a survey going out because I do know the last survey had some issues. I know there were some parents who were confused if they were talking about the fall, if they were talking about the spring, there was some confusion. But one of the things on that survey, it did say that the 6-foot distancing would be maintained. So I know a lot of parents answered based on that assumption. I know that is something, we've been hearing: wear your mask, wash your hands, 6 feet distancing, 6 feet distancing. It's been a common theme now for a year. So, and I think that what I would really like to see is that those information sessions, that there be multiple ones held, because, every parent isn't available at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday. It's just what it is. And that there be multiple ones held at every building level. So elementary, middle, and the high school, because there are questions. I know my own high school daughter chose to stay virtual this marking period because she knew that they were trying to get more kids in the building. And she said she does fine with virtual. So she didn't need to take up a space in the building. But I have concerns going for the rest of the year. You've got 25 kids, 30 kids in a class. If 20 or 25 of them are in school and 5 are in virtual, how much attention are those virtual kids going to get? And, my younger daughter has a 504, my older daughter has a GIEP. So, there's some issues there that I think need to be addressed. I think they need to be addressed fully. And honestly, I think we can't, I know we all want our kids back in school. Trust me, we all want our kids back in school, but we just want to have real information, not just painting a picture of sunshine and rainbows, because it's just not what it's going to be. So let's be fully honest, fully transparent about what the situation is going to be. And, last summer, there was a whole thing about the virtual program and the hybrid program. And then after the surveys went out, it was, oops, the virtual program at the secondary level is different. So I just don't want to see that happen, because there's enough going on. And I don't think parents and students need to be kind of put into that position. So I just want to make sure that this is a fully thought out, fully planned for, and that all information is included. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Melwert was the next one, please. Mr. Ganesh, if you could kindly unmute him.
Hi, Jim Melwert, Collegeville Borough. I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank everyone involved, especially the parents who served on the task force. Also, Dr. Russell and building administration, everyone involved with all the planning that's gotten us at least to this point, and to the board members who have put in long hours to drive the conversation where it is and where it needs to go. Hopefully this is one of the more stressful years and situations we go through. And hopefully this is a lesson for our community, that in stressful situations, it's easy to demonize people who don't agree with you. It's easy to focus on those with extreme viewpoints and to focus on the people who suck all the oxygen out of the room with extremist viewpoints. And it's too easy to take that extremist brush and use it on all your opponents. More often than not, we're never that far apart. Most people operate in the middle. And even when we disagree with each other, we're not that far from each other. We can get angry. We're all passionate about our children, and that's to be expected. There are a few things in this world that we're going to be more passionate about, but don't get personal. Everyone approaches and is approaching this with their personal backgrounds, and they can't be faulted for their beliefs. There are a lot of questions now. There are going to be more questions down the road, but we need to understand each other. We need to understand where everyone's coming from, and we need to maintain the respect. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. I believe next up, Mr. Ganesh, was Mrs. Bruzek, please.
Hi, this is Lauren Bruzak, Collegeville Borough. I really just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Russell for such a thorough presentation on a return to school plan. I appreciate all of the hard work that has gotten us to this point, not just with the administration, but also with the school board. I know you have all worked overtime to get us to a point where we see a plan and we see hope to return to a 5 full day a week school day for our kids. The kids that need that really do need that. And I appreciate all of your conversation tonight that has given hope that we're headed down a path that's going to lead us there. I also want to shout out to our teachers. The amount of work and effort and creation that you've put into continuing to educate our kids this year has been tremendous. And you've pivoted and shifted time and again. And I know one more shift is not a small ask. But as we prepare for more on-site instruction, and I do hope that we get to more on-site instruction like was in the presentation. If you need anything from us, teachers, if you need anything from your parents, please reach out to us. We are still a community made up of your classroom helpers and mystery readers and field trip chaperones. And we miss you and we are here for you. And if there's anything that the community can do to help in the transition, please let us know. We are here to help. Thank you.
Thank you. And just so the attendees who want to comment know, when you raise your hand, sometimes folks are now going out of order. So I'm trying to keep track, but and will do my best. But if somehow I call someone and you think you were before them, it's not me picking and choosing sides. It's that people are kind of bopping all around my screen for some reason. But with that, I do know these next two are correct. Mr. Ganesh, if you could kindly unmute Mrs. Vecca Schilling, please.
Hi, everybody. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
This is Anne Marie Schilling. I am in Collegeville Borough. I have 2 in the high school and 1 at East in 8th grade. So my comments today are out of concern for the mental health of the students in the district. I emailed the board and Dr. Russell an article detailing how the Las Vegas school district had to reopen schools as they had lost 19 of their students to suicide since the pandemic started, and the youngest was 9. As one father said, my son died from coronavirus, but not in the way you think. A board member responded that Montgomery County numbers had not indicated a rise in suicides and that Dr. Russell had shared a slide saying as much. I looked at that slide, which said the number of suicides in age range 0 through 19 doubled from 2019 to 2020 in Montgomery County. There were 4 suicides in that age group in 2019, and in 2020, there were 8. There's already been at least 1 this year. This doesn't count the number of attempts, hospitalizations for suicidal ideation, or other mental health crises. A board member said that since the age group went to 19, we can't be sure that some of the counted suicides were school age, but the bulk of that age group is school age. There are 18-year-olds in our school system, and I don't really think we need to exclude the 19-year-olds in that data set to see that there's a problem. Another board member mentioned that declining mental health was a problem pre-pandemic. They had told some of us that the general public, people like me, don't know enough about the mental health landscape to maintain a judgment linking pandemic isolation as a cause for the rise in suicides. So I went to the CDC and the NIH. Both have produced studies showing that isolation due to the pandemic has caused a steeper decline in mental health among young people. CDC data shows mental health crisis ER visits for age group 5 to 11 have gone up 24%, and for age group 5 through 17 has gone up 31%. The NIH article, which is a summary of 80 studies, states that the longer the isolation lasts, the more their rates will increase. The American Academy of Pediatrics agrees with those studies and provides student studies showing isolation of school closure exacerbates educational disparities among children in poverty. So we keep hearing about the CDC 6-foot guidelines. Let's listen to some other statistics that bear witness to what our children are going through and what they need from our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ganesh, if you could kindly unmute Mr. Liggett, please.
Thank you. This is Robert Liggett, Perkiomen Township. Good evening, everyone. Board meetings are not just the topic of the moment, but it's a time when decisions of policy are made. And the single most important thing that a board member does is make decisions. So I would like to express my support to the update to policy 903. I want to support the ESCO number 4 contract that's coming up to keep our facilities up to date. And I also really want to strongly support the 3 resolutions that are offered tonight on equity, on staff vaccinations, and especially on the charter school funding reform. But what I am not going to support is the further dragging of our feet on increasing the students' instructional time in our school. Members of the board, this is not only the topic of the moment, but it is a litmus test that you and your surrogates will be judged upon. With all due respect to the time and effort that it takes to get a wall full of academic credentials, it doesn't take a doctorate in anything to know what is best for our children in regard to how they learn and where they can find the social, educational, and emotional support that they deserve. Both my heart and head tell me that I must fully support the 3 motions to increase the instructional time. In the past, board members have referred to popular view as expressed in a referendum as a rationale to oppose, say, the artificial turf fields. I hope that you remain consistent in your view about following popular will, seeing as the majority of our families want a fuller full-time experience. People more erudite than I have argued that the current hybrid situation should be maintained. They worry about the social and emotional impact of returning students to full-time instruction in this academic year. Well, this is a problem that I would welcome. I have confidence in the resilience of our children and the support that our truly professional staff can offer when they return. Well, we should not persevere, and we should engage to move forward. We should not persevere because this means that we accept the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And we should not persevere because perseverance is not a lesson that I want to teach my children when they can be change makers. I try to show my children through word and deed that you can overcome, that you can make change. Board members, it is now time to show if you are just going to preserve or to persevere or to move forward on the path that Dr. Russell is showing us. We can take this step forward, and we will remember those that hold us back and lack the courage to engage the future. Thank you for listening.
Okay, Mr. Ganesh, if you could kindly unmute. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. First name is Chris, so I'm not sure if male or female, but Taylor Mina, I believe is how it's pronounced, please.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Chris Taramina. I'm from Perkiomen Township. I have 2 children in the high school. I'd like to thank everybody for their time. Obviously, the school board, the teachers, Dr. Russell and her administration. Everybody has been putting in yeoman's work to solve the challenges that we face. Before I start, I would kindly ask that this 30-second warning be suspended for my time, as I can clearly see the clock on my screen. I would request that as we're going through the presentations and we're getting feedback from Dr. Russell based on the tremendous amount of work that she's done in researching her approach and her recommendations, that if we have the ability to ask questions and get clarification, that we do so. Unfortunately, it's been disappointing to hear only a few board members with significant comments towards her presentations. Other board members are commenting in the board comment section of our meetings. And to that end, I'd be asked that board members be held to the same standard as community members, 1 opportunity to speak for 3 minutes at a time during that period. But my ask of the board is to take all items to committee, solve problems there and discuss, and the outcome should be twofold. You should either call for a vote or request more information. Additional comments from the board members, regardless of their intention, and I know they're always good, don't necessarily produce results. This is a very tense period in this community. So to mitigate some of that tension, I would ask that all the data sources that you utilize to make decisions remain consistent and be agreed upon. Google searches should not count. Back of the napkin math should not count. Not to pick on you, Dr. Hallis, but pictures on your phone should not be basis for ways to make decision, even though they were taken at a great time, I'm sure, when you were doing mission work. The problem in those circumstances is that those opinions seem to create more tension as opposed to reduce tension and emphasize your point of either safety or return to school. So what I would request, again, is to take all items to committee, solve the problems there. There are several committees, I know, and come away with either a call for a vote or a request for more information. I would like to echo the sentiments of several other folks that have called in tonight. Please be a voice for vaccination to the county, or excuse me, to the state. Be repetitive, ask for it a lot, be a pest. Continue to ask for vaccination for teachers, but also please continue the mission to try to get our kids back in school. I think it's more of a detriment than it is being safe, and that is my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ganesh, if you could kindly unmute Dr. Campley, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I am Tammy Campley. I am with Perkiomen Township, and I'm just calling in to kind of speak to everything that's going on here. I mean, I definitely see how much work has gone into this, and I appreciate all of the efforts that Dr. Russell has put in and everyone else that's been working on it. It's clearly a lot of thought has gone into this. However, with all of this information, there are also many, many questions that do continue to come up that are not answered yet. And we have students who are going to be coming back to buildings and teachers going to be in these buildings without these questions answered. And that in and of itself is really not okay. I think we need to have a solid plan, a plan where all of these things are hashed out before we expect to return, including the comments about shortening the 6 feet distance. Yes, the CDC still recommends it. Do we have sports going on? We do, but those students are together an hour, 2 hours. They're not in a room confined for 7.5 hours. We need to consider that recommendation by the CDC. If we wait until the fall, it gives us an opportunity to get all of the teachers vaccinated, not just 200. All of them that want to be vaccinated can have that opportunity. We also need to consider the fact that when these students come back, it's going to feel like day one of school again. It is going to be September. And yes, our students are resilient and they will persevere and they will get to where they need to be. And our teachers will do that as well. However, I would love to see a plan that gets us back 100% safely come fall. Give us the next 2.5 months for students to have some consistency. Let's not disrupt them one more time. This constant disruption hurts them socially and emotionally. And for the students who are struggling being home, there is nothing that says that we have to have everybody do the same thing. If there is evidence and there is documentation and we know that there are some kids who are struggling a lot more than others, then bring them back. Don't make them wait until the fall. But for the majority, I think we really need to consider hashing out and solidifying all those questions before we come back. But I do thank all of you for your hard work and your efforts, because we will all persevere and be resilient and get through this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ganesh, if you could kindly unmute Mr. Saylor, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. My name is Jason Saylor. I'm in Skipback Township. I wanted to first thank Dr. Russell and everyone who participated in putting that presentation together. I'm not 100% sure, but I hope that a presentation will be sent out so all parents have an opportunity to review the presentation. I want to thank, well, obviously a lot of people have spoken today. I want to thank Mr. Leggett for his comments. I want to go through a few things that I put down in my notes. First of all, there is no if. Kids are struggling. There's data for it. That shouldn't be a comment that we're thinking about. There should be no thought process to try to wonder if kids are struggling. Kids are struggling. That's a fact. K through 12, kids are struggling, and we need to be thinking about that. The Perkiomen Valley community is extremely strong, and there are many people that are willing to assist the school board. And it's important when the school board puts committees together that those committees are nonpartisan. Committees shouldn't be put together of people of your own thought process. They should be a consensus of all sides so they can debate the core issues of the day and come with realistic opportunities for success. I hope the board takes the information that was provided today by Dr. Russell and comes back with a unanimous vote to reopen our schools and send our kids back to school on March 22nd or of the week of March 22nd. One of the things that needs to be thought of that the school board should be putting together plans for are the mental health issues that our children are going to face in returning now in March and for the future. There are many studies that show that this is a 5-year yield to work with students who have developed social problems with virtual learning. I also fully support reducing the distance from 6 feet to 3 feet. I do understand that it is a recommendation by the CDC, but there are other strong international organizations that also recommend 3 feet. Using the CDC's guidelines is just cherry picking which guideline you want to put together. The other thing is I want to make sure there's a thought process on how we can assist our teachers. Teaching virtually simultaneously with teaching in the classroom is extremely difficult, and it's a hard ask for our teachers. And our teachers have been asked to do a lot of hard things this year, and our teachers don't get enough credit. They are the people that are with our kids more hours during the day, during the week, assisting them to be as successful as possible as they can. I hope we can put together plans that if we're going to continue virtual this year, that you could have teachers strictly teaching virtual and then teachers back in the classroom. I urge the Perkiomen Valley School Board to unanimously pass the resolution so that our children can go back to school starting the week of March 22nd. And Dr. Russell, I appreciate everything you and your team have put together in making this happen. And our community appreciates it as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands up.
Dr. Hallis has one more hand.
That Mr. Melward had already commented earlier. So there's nobody else unless we'll give an opportunity to see if another hand pops up. But I'm not seeing any. So with that, we'll go to Section 2, reports. Item 2.01 is the student liaisons report. Ms. McGovern and Mr. Smith, if you would, please.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to mention really quickly that the NHS induction ceremony is going to be held virtually. It's a recorded session that I believe you can access on the PV High School YouTube this Thursday, March 4th. And other than that, I believe that clubs and students are running smoothly as usual. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I would just like to use my time tonight to reiterate what a lot of the board members said, that this has been, one of the longest years, especially for students. We've had to really adjust the last few years, over the last year, about how we approach something that we thought we knew very well and have to reevaluate how we learn best. And I really thought that Dr. Russell did a really good job planning out how an approach to 5 days would work and what would have to happen. And I would also just like to say there is an economics club starting up, and I really encourage a lot of students to join that. I think that's a great opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, there's item 2.02, the president's report. And I do have a statement that is actually from not just myself, but the entire school board of directors and the superintendent. And I'll just simply read it. It has been 1 year this month since the circumstances of the pandemic forced a shift in the educational services school districts across the country, state, and county provide K-12 students. As a school board and superintendent, we are proud of the manner in which our community has partnered with the school district to continue servicing our students and families. The provision of food, technology resources, learning, and creative activities that afford our students opportunities to socialize during a time when they may feel isolated have kindly and generously continued over the course of the past year. We extend sincere thanks to those who have made donations to the school district in support of our students and families. As time has progressed, the challenges of the pandemic have been quite burdensome to many in our community. And while the district has worked diligently to meet the needs of its students and families, faculty, and staff, it is aware that all do not feel satisfied. However, as a district, we will continue our efforts to provide the best possible service to our students in a safe and healthy manner. We will continue to cultivate inclusive school communities that empower our students and staff. The circumstances of the pandemic will not stop us from advancing our mission despite the challenges we face and the unorthodox approaches we employ. During these uncertain times, our teachers and instructional support staff have committed themselves to our students in ways that continue to build relationships and facilitate learning. Their efforts are recognized and appreciated, and the Board of School Directors and Dr. Russell and the superintendent wish to extend our sincere thanks to these staff members. Recognition and thanks are also extended to those staff who've supported the experiences of our students with food services and the healthy maintenance and operation of our schools. All employees of the district contribute to the services and experiences of our students. It takes a village is a statement that truly applies under the circumstances of the pandemic and emphasizes the significance of all who comprise the school community. Currently, our community is unsettled. However, there's hope on the horizon, and life as we know it is taking steps towards normalcy. It is our hope that the steps can be taken in unity with the healing of wounds caused by the differences in our views and actions. We are confident the Perkiomen Valley School District will overcome these challenging times and once again unite as a community. The Board of School Directors and Superintendent will continue to provide the resources and actions that facilitate these outcomes. Thank you once again to all who have positively supported the schools and one another during these trying times. Thank you. And with that, I'll turn matters over item 2.03 to the superintendent's report. Dr. Russell, if you would, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hallis. And I will be brief this evening with my report since I've spent a lot of time talking to the board in public. I just want to showcase some of our students and their efforts during these times right now. And the PV Voice staff has been focusing on some personal profiles at the high school. and some of the softer news about what our students are doing outside of school. And senior Juliana Ems has a passion for baking, and she opted for some baking and supported some individuals who would benefit from that, and has raised some money in doing so. So here are some pictures of Juliana actually creating some of her delicious looking desserts. And we also have another student at the high school, Cassidy Romano, who created a video for Black History Month celebrating the legacy of Dr. Frank Boston. And George Whitehair reached out to Dr. Moss and I to let us know that Cassidy actually took some information from a publication that he prepared and created a video that targeted teaching and learning of younger students when it comes to the legacy of Dr. Frank Boston. And I'll post the video for board and public to view. But Cassidy did a really nice job with this, and it was another way that our students celebrated Black History Month last month. And then another student showcase is Sonali Shandy. She has created the Lumina Show, where she is actually conducting some interviews and creating some podcasts. And she interviewed our own Nydia Han, who is a local reporter for Channel 6. And then she also interviewed Mindy Kaling, and some wonderful conversations. If you have a few minutes and can take some time to listen, you can access these podcasts through this link. So 3 of our students that are really going above and beyond and showcasing some of their skills, finding things to do as they navigate through the pandemic, and some really different ways of actually experiencing school. So kudos to all of them. Really nice work. We also have the virtual ensemble, grades 7 to 12. This is pretty impressive. Again, this is another worthwhile listen. If you have a few minutes, it's pretty brief, but it involves many, many students from across our district. And if you play the video, and you can, again, or play the, it's a video with the music via this link, you will certainly be entertained. They did a terrific job. There were 300 or so Perkiomen Valley music students in grades 3 through 12. And it was really impressive, and it's really a joy to listen to. So if you have a few minutes, please take a listen. And it was nice that we were able to involve so many students in such a unique sort of way, thanks to the students that participated. So lastly, I'm going to shift from showcasing some of our students. That's really the enjoyable aspect of the superintendent's report each month, to some news about state assessments. The federal government has afforded states the opportunity to submit a waiver, if they so choose, to apply for an exemption for state tests, PSSAs and Keystones. And Pennsylvania has opted at this point to apply for an extension of the window. So they have not applied for a waiver to cancel PSSAs and Keystones, in other words, but instead to allow for more time for our students to participate in those. And the window will open from March, and instead of closing pretty quickly sometime in May, by the time we get through makeups, it will remain open through the end of September. So we are right now in discussions with administrative teams about when we'll administer and how these tests, while there are senators and other representatives of our state advocating to actually apply for the waiver and cancel the test, but we'll see. So for now, we're moving forward, making plans to administer these tests. However, we do have some more time at this point this year to do that. And with that, that ends my report. Thank you, Dr. Hallis.
Dr. Russell. That brings us to item 2.04, the solicitor's report. Mr. Subers, do you have a report?
The only thing I would mention is that in addition to the elimination of the out-of-state travel restrictions that Dr. Russell mentioned earlier, the state also revises maximum occupancy permits for indoor events to 15% without any limit as to the size of the venue, and revises maximum occupancy limit for outdoor events to 20% of maximum occupancy, again, without any reference to the venue size. I'd also note that there's been numerous press reports that the Vaccine Joint Task Force will be meeting this week and potentially revising the state's plan for vaccines to move teachers to Class 1A. So that's something that we're waiting to hear on. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Subers. That brings us to item 2.05, board and district committee reports. Does any board member wish to comment about their committee report? Mrs. Evans Brockett, if you would, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hollis. I just wanted to make sure that all board members are aware that the PSBA Virtual Advocacy Day is coming up on March 22nd, and you can sign up through My PSBA. The big thing this year is charter school legislation reform. Our own Joe Cerisi has proposed House Bill 272 along with Representative Wendy Thomas from Bucks County for some charter school reform. And I had reached out to Mr. Weaver to get some numbers for our district. We spend over $1.1 million this year on charter schools, that's bricks and mortar and cyber charter. And with the legislation that's being proposed just for our regular education students that are currently in charter schools, we would save over $500,000 if this passed, and the savings would be even greater for our special education students that are in there. So this is something that we as board members can advocate for, but also the community can reach out and advocate. And then Dr. Russell just mentioned the assessment waiver, and that's something that's going to be part of PSBA Virtual Advocacy Day as well. So I encourage you all to sign up.
Thank you. Mrs. Lofton, if you would, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hollis. Actually, I have a question relating back to the PSSA assessments. Dr. Russell, as it currently stands, a window has been created within which we are to administer the tests. Assuming that does not change, is it an administration decision or a board decision when the tests are actually conducted?
Interesting question, and I would probably defer to Mr. Subers. Typically, administration decides the schedule within the window. However, I don't know if there's something else that we should be considering under these unusual circumstances this year.
I would concur that it would be an administrative decision typically when new tests are scheduled.
So given that, Dr. Russell, I mean, I am curious, is our administration going to be moving forward with the assumption that we're going to have to administer these tests, and what is the thinking around that? Because, you know, I think that there is value in getting a snapshot of where we stand, but given the amount of time that typically goes into administering these tests and the gaps that have emerged, you know, it would be good to have data on those gaps, but I also really hate taking away from instructional time to create this testing situation. So I'm curious, you know, and then if you're leaning toward moving it to the fall, or what the thinking is on that.
Currently, administration is in conversations about what might be best for the students. So we are planning to administer the assessments based on the direction that we have currently from the state. I know from a meeting with Senator Mensch that Senator Martin and some other representatives, as I mentioned, are advocating to the state to actually apply for the waiver and relieve all schools of the obligations. Until that occurs, we are planning and thinking about the timing that might make the most sense. I don't think you're alone, Mrs. Lofton, in your views of what might be best for students this year with respect to testing and time in school. However, we're planning because we're obligated to do so. And I don't know that we'll go into the fall with our plans currently. and I'm not exactly sure how they will actually play out this spring. There are pros and cons that have been discussed, and Mrs. Smith can probably talk a little bit more about where the conversations are. She spent a lot of time with Mr. Burke at the high school and talking about keystones and even just the logistics of administering, because we have spaces now that we would like to use for lunch. The logistics becomes a bit complicated now with administering the tests in the way that we sometimes administer these tests, along with AP exams, et cetera. So right now we're planning and thinking very carefully about making the best of a difficult situation.
Okay, thank you.
Do any other board members wish to comment? Or I should really say report out from their committees. If not, this is this might be a useful time too, just because of some public comments made tonight. You know, that everything should be pushed down to committees and this sort of stuff. There are some things that actually by law we have to do fully and openly in public. There's a thing called a sunshine law. No more than 4 board members can serve on a committee. And there are some aspects of our duties that have to be done during a board meeting. So just to offer a little of educational information to the public. But with that brings us to section 3, the consent agenda. Item 3.01, the consent agenda for the business meeting. Items that represent standard routine business of the board are included in the consent agenda. Board members may request to have any items removed for discussion. The consent items as of March 1st, 2021 are listed below. Additional agenda items may be added to the consent agenda during the work session meeting. The following items will be added to the consent agenda for approval at the March 8th, 2021 business meeting. And they are listed there, items 7.01, 7.02, 7.03, 7.04, 7.07, 8.01, 8.02, 8.03, and 8.04. Okay. With that, I'll turn to section 4. Dr. Kolar, if you would, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hallis. Item 4.01 is an education update, so I'll turn it over to Mrs. Smith for that portion.
Thank you, Dr. Kolar. This evening's education update, the majority of it will actually be led by Dr. Boyd. I have just a few items at the beginning here from teaching and learning. So we'll go over some ELA resources, summer programming and specials, and then Dr. Boyd will get to her presentation. So at our education committee meeting this month and last month, we've been talking a lot about a new resource for our English language arts program in our K-5 setting. And we have landed on a new resource from HMH, which is called Into Reading. We've spent 2 months with our education committee looking at the benefits to this program and are at the point that we would like to recommend the adoption of this. You can see an overview of the costs here, and while the price tag at the bottom does look very large, it is very comparable to other programs, and this has many supplemental materials that also support the, really the cornerstone of any elementary program is the English language arts program. And we're also really pleased with the level of inclusion and supplementary materials for our special education students, and so we've been sure to order sufficient materials for all of our students to meet their needs. And I will just point out the company is comping us about $90,000 in product, and we are greatly appreciative for that. The next slide has on it the just a timeline for you. It is atypical for us to be asking for approval in March. Normally these would be in June or July, but because of the amount of what it is that we are looking to purchase, it would be nice to have school board approval at this time so we can make a commitment to the company, which will allow us to schedule the professional development that will impact every single elementary staff member. So it's a big undertaking that we'd like to be able to get scheduled. We will be funding it either from Ready to Learn and or COVID relief funds, the digital part of it anyway. And this was vetted through the education committee and is recommended by that committee. The next topic is our summer programming. We are trying to seek your approval earlier than normal for summer programming, just so we can get a jump on really expanding our opportunities this summer in particular due to the pandemic. So the board agenda has a much more detailed explanation of what programs we are offering. But we, in the K-8 realm, we are focusing on math and ELA with some themed units, high interest topics, both offering remediation and enrichment. At our middle school, we have our enrichment programs already thought about. Elementary, we're working on that a little bit more. We're hoping to not have any cost to our families. We'll fund this through the COVID relief grants, and obviously follow all of our health and safety plan guidelines. The next slide has for you just some implications for that. We are seeking your approval tonight of these programs in the K-8, just so that we are able to post for the staffing, because really the staffing that we can secure is going to drive out how many students we are able to have participate in the program. So we'd like to get that moving along sooner rather than later. We're looking for program coordinators, nurses, and teachers. We would also then be funding some resources, and you can see the estimated costs just for the K-8 piece. We will be bringing forth to you in April the ideas for our secondary credit recovery program in our 9th through 12. And again, this was vetted by the Education Committee and is recommended. And then the last topic from me before I turn it over to Dr. Boyd is just an update on elementary specials. You see on the left what our current programming looks like in 2021, which was that split that we agreed upon around this time last year with health and wellness of 15 days and Spanish of 15 days. And our future goal continues to be moving to 30 days per grade level of the health and wellness course. The next slide shows you what our recommendation is at this point. We have talked about this for 3 years. We have also had most recent conversations at our education committee meeting. And I feel like we have really come to a point that meets the needs of our students and a way for us to move forward. So we are looking to increase the health and wellness programming to 30 days. We know that we have to improve upon our curriculum and programming and our resources, and we're already talking with our teachers, looking at professional development and looking at what other resources and curriculum are available to us. We want to implement clear evaluation criteria, and we know that this option does imply 2 additional staff members to teach the health and wellness at the elementary building, allowing 1 per building. We would maintain Spanish programming at 15 days, and we've talked a lot about, in conjunction with that into reading adoption, adjusting our library programming from 30 to 15 days. However, maintaining a full-time librarian at each elementary school and providing them a flexible schedule every other cycle when they're not providing the library lessons, and able to do book selections, individual students, support small group instruction, get professional development on how do we redesign and reimagine our elementary library programs. This idea is supported by our elementary librarians. Mrs. Folks has been working with them. And the majority of our education committee last week, most of the comments were very positive and in support of this particular idea. You will not see an item on the agenda for action, but we'd love to hear your thoughts tonight and possibly bring this as an action item either next week or in April if you're not ready to take action. So I'm going to pause here just to see if there are any questions or comments on this particular topic. Mrs. Mayers, I see your hand.
Thank you. I thought I remembered when we were talking about this in the education committee that there's a strong possibility that we won't have to actually add these 2 positions, but because of enrollment, we would be at a 0. Is that not accurate anymore?
Oh, thank you for bringing that up, Mrs. Mayers. I should have clarified that. So it's 2 positions that we need to add for this particular role. However, you're correct. When we look at all of our staffing and our reduction in enrollments, we may be able to gain these 2 out of the staff that we would be reducing at the elementary. And when Dr. Boyd is finished with her presentation, I'll go over staffing because I know that was a concern mentioned about where will this fall on the priority list. So we're prepared to share that with you after Dr. Boyd's presentation. Thank you. Dr. Kolar?
Thank you. I was just going to respond to your question. Having been a part of the education committee for several years now and been discussing this over and over again, I would like to see an action item on the agenda. I think our specials teachers deserve some time to plan and to not be in limbo, since we have been talking about this for so long. So I would welcome this on the agenda for voting next week.
Thank you, Dr. Kolar. Ms. White?
That's what I was going to say. So I second that. We'd like to vote on it at this point. Yep.
Thank you, Ms. White. Anyone else have a comment? Mrs. Lofton?
So my biggest concern about this again is the priorities, because I know we're talking about a lot of different needs and a lot of different issues. And so I think that we need to be looking at the entire list of positions that we're creating in making these decisions. So I know that we're going to be looking at that next. But I know as we've gone through this in the past, the priority list continues to evolve through the spring, especially as we see what retirements come through. So I'm not certain that this month is the right month. I'd like to maybe wait and see how things continue to evolve as we see what the needs are as we prepare for what happens this spring, and also how we plan to bring students back in the fall. We know that we're going to have just a huge set of mental and emotional needs that need to be addressed. And I think that we, as well as educational gaps that have developed, and I think that we need to be looking to see what the district's recommendations are for addressing that before we finalize this. And so I think that this is something that maybe needs to wait another month before we finalize those decisions and make it as a part of our entire budget.
Thank you, Mrs. Lofton. Mrs. Evans Brockett?
I would agree with Mrs. Lofton. I think voting on this already would be difficult, not knowing where we are with staffing, and particularly, as Mrs. Lofton said, what the needs of what the fall is going to look like. I would prefer our classroom sizes be smaller in the fall in order to make sure that we're meeting any educational gaps, then try to stretch our staffing to fill these two positions as a priority.
Thank you. Ms. White?
I just wanted to just reiterate that I know that you tried to truncate Mrs. Smith based on the overall presentation that you gave during the education committee. And I appreciate that for time. I think that the heavy lifting should always be done in the committee, as people have mentioned. But I just wanted to point out that part of what that larger presentation addressed was the social and emotional needs for our go-ahead plan, as well as priority. So I just wanted to just help along the fact that those were conversations that were had, and this ultimate decision was still supported by the committee overall as a whole. And once you show the staffing plan and whatnot, we had already had that discussion that this priority would move up in terms of the needs for the district. So that was all.
Thank you, Ms. White. Well, Dr. Russell and I will discuss how to move forward. And I also could point out to you that around this time last year, we did approve the creation of a 6th grade health course, which we ultimately didn't end up staffing. So maybe there's a way that we can do something similar here, talk about how might we want to change it so we can begin working towards that. And then the staffing piece of it maybe could come later. So we'll talk, and Dr. Russell can determine how we should move forward. But thank you for the feedback. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Boyd now, and then I'll come back when she's finished. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share some information around special education. On the next slide, it really is just to outline that this is in alignment with policy 113, that annually we are required to discuss with the board really the staffing needs that we have and make recommendations to you for the fulfillment of programming needs for our students, as well as review of the required programs and services that we provide. So the information that's presented here this evening We'll just highlight again some of the data and then some of the initiatives that we initiated last year, as well as some of the things that we are continuing with this school year. And again, as we've spoken, really our vision is about an inclusive community for all of our students. And we do recognize that any of the areas that we work to improve upon really start with general education. It involves collaboration, and it's about supporting all of our students to ensure that they have the supports and services that they are in need of. And the next slide really highlights some of the inclusive practices that are underway. Last year, prior to the pandemic, we undertook Universal Design for Learning, and we had teams from each of our buildings begin to attend training that was offered at the IU. And then, of course, the pandemic interrupted the continued support. So this year, we have partnered with the MCIU to pilot Universal Design for Learning at Middle School West. And the IU is also using this as a way to really establish their training platform that they will ultimately roll out to the county. So this is a nice opportunity for us to have that partnership. The IU, Mr. Jesse Gluckman and Mrs. Lauren Benfield, come into Middle School West on a regular basis. They meet with teachers, they work with the teams, and they have these training sessions around UDL, with the teachers then returning to the classrooms to try to implement some things prior to the next meeting. The other piece that I'd like to highlight though, I'm sorry, if you could go back, yes, still on this slide. Universal Design for Learning is it's not just around special education. It really is about removing the barriers for all of our students. So one of the other partnerships underway with the IU is they have a book study, and many of our staff members are participating in this book study, and it has to do with anti-racism and UDL. So again, it's that partnership. Two other areas of focus are around co-teaching partnerships. We have continued to expand upon that primarily at the high school. Dr. Sandy Shady is our inclusion facilitator who has really driven that initiative and has supported our staff. Out of that, last year came a schedule coding system, which I will discuss in a little more detail in another slide. And that is really around how do we schedule our students so that we have natural proportions within our classrooms? How do we identify those students that need co-taught classrooms, that maybe need additional supports, or can be successful in the general education classroom? And that coding system is a way to do all of those things. I'll show, like I said, I'll share with that in some slides. And then I just wanted to highlight that Integrate for Good. We did bring that to the board a few months ago about a partnership. And this service is really targeted for our low incidence special education students who are of those years of transition time. And this group is coming in, partnering with us. We have 10 weeks where they are working with our students in a virtual manner to create digital portfolios for some of our most intensive learners. And that unveiling of the students' digital portfolios will take place towards the end of this month if we remain on track with the weather. The next slide really highlights, again, some of our data that we've already shared with the board. This is our snapshot from last year, and it comes from our December 1 count. So our December 1 count information has been submitted to the state for the 2020-21 school year, but we will not have those results until the spring. But this information, again, just gives highlights. We are above the state average in terms of the number of students that we are including, and we are below the state average in some of those other areas where we want to be below state average. And again, this is linked so that if you want to see additional information, you can do that by going to the Penn Data site. So this is the schedule coding system, and truly this is a way that we take all of our students. We started it last year at the high school, and we did roll it into our middle schools as well in the spring of last year. So we identify all of our students in some way, shape, or form, and again, we take a look so that we can balance our classrooms and we can provide our students with the supports and services that they need. We start this process in the spring, so we are now underway with this for the 21-22 school year. And what this allows us to do is identify exactly what we need in terms of the number of courses, the number of classes that we'll need at the high school for next year. And then it also allows us to determine our teaching partnerships for those co-teaching models. And the next slide really can give you just a highlight of how that coding looks. So we've nicknamed it the crux coding. And that really comes out of our gen ed students have those initials crux. So we wanted to give it something that was easy for us to remember. And what you can see here is really the different layers of supports that we put into play at the high school and as well at Middle School East and Middle School West. So this is just a sample of what that coding system looks like. It is flexible. We have changed it for this year from what we learned last year. Last year was the first year that we implemented this. The next slide, please. And from that crux coding, this shows you what we've been able to do at the high school in terms of the number of co-taught sections. You can see that we have significantly increased the number of sections from last year to this year. And it's something that we continue to look at. We are working on a video so that we capture some of the highlights of our co-taught classrooms as well as our inclusive classrooms. We don't have that prepared to bring to the board this evening, but I would like to share that with you in April. And what that will do is it'll give you a glimpse into our classrooms, and it'll take some of this data and bring it to life. And so, like I said, I will be sharing that with you next month. Our next slide then is really representative of those pieces that I've just spoken about. How we have taken a look at our students' schedules, we've looked at their needs, we've taken a look at the accommodations, modifications, and the goals that they have, and we've been able to place them into appropriate classes. Not all students are in co-taught classrooms. Not all students are in a general education classroom. We do recognize that some of our students need a smaller classroom, a smaller, more specialized learning environment. And we also provide that as well. So it's not to say that all students will be in the general education classroom 80% or more of the day, but it is about looking and starting with, is the general education classroom appropriate for our students? And how can we make it accessible for them before we consider a more restrictive environment? So the general education classroom is really the least restrictive environment for our students. And that's our starting point when we engage in conversations about the learning for our special education students. And this pyramid you have seen before, but this is again, what I've just really shared with you is how we start with that least restrictive environment. And then we work our way through that pyramid. And the most restrictive environment does involve out of district placements. We do have students that at times need specialized programming that within the district, we don't have either the facility or the capability to support that. And when we see that need, then we do place students out of the district. But when we can, we do our very best to maintain them within the district. And so last year, if you recall, we brought to you the need to shift some of our autistic support programming because the number of students entering in to the autistic support program was growing, and we did not have the space at South because that is the elementary school that was also seeing an increase in their enrollment. So what these next two slides do is really just highlight for you the programs that we offer in each of our buildings. And what we did last year is we shifted the K-2 autistic support program to Skipback Elementary. Middle School East, Middle School West, and the high school. And you'll notice for the high school, if you look particularly around where it says the 9 to 12 plus, and the reason I highlight this is because students that have special education services can be educated within the public education system until the age of 21. We do see this occurring for some of our most intensive students. Some of our most intensive learners do remain with us till the age of 21. What I also like to highlight, in the school year of 2009-2010, that was when we brought autistic support programming back to Perkiomen Valley School District at all levels. So if we brought students in at the age of 5, we're now in the year 2020 to 2021 school year, and we have students who are still with us at the ages of 20 and 21. So what we're seeing is that that population of intensive needs is still remaining with us, and we're seeing some larger numbers that we need to address at our high school level. Our next slide also helps to demonstrate this in a little more detail. This is a 5-year overview of our disability categories and the percentages within each. Now, while there's not a significant difference in most of them, the two categories where there have been differences is in autism and intellectual disabilities. And while that increase may be slight, it is also our most intensive students, and the class sizes, those caseloads by state requirement, are less. The average class size for an autistic support classroom or intellectual disabilities or intensive learning support classrooms tend to be anywhere from 5 to 12 students, 12 being the very max. And that also depends on the needs of the students, on how many students we have in those classrooms. So again, those two categories have increased over time, and those are the areas where we see the need to address with in terms of staffing. The next slide is comparison of our special education data to our district enrollment. Again, it's the 5-year trend. You can see that enrollments are declining, both in special education and in our overall enrollment. However, that percentage is not necessarily in comparison. Our special ed numbers are still a little bit higher, but they are also declining. The next slide I'd like to share, this comes from Dr. Russell's presentation that we had in January, the data presentation to the school board. And what this shows you is the enrollment by grade levels. And again, I simply want to highlight for everyone that where we see our largest enrollments is at our secondary levels right now. That same trend holds true with regard to special education. So in an upcoming slide, I will show you average caseloads, and you'll see that they look higher at the secondary level. And this is also in alignment with the overall enrollments for grade levels. So this is the case averages. I believe that we brought this to the school board last year when we were advocating and requesting some of our staffing. These are averages without, if you could go back, please. Yes, these are averages without an ask at the present moment for any increased staff. This is based on the staff that we currently have. But what you can see is the numbers again are going to increase at the high school. The middle schools, East is slightly higher than middle school West for next year. And our elementary numbers are slightly projected to be lower at the present time. This is really a result, again, as we've talked about the pandemic. If you recall, when we closed the schools, we really hit a pause button with regards to special education evaluations and identification of any students who may qualify as a need of special education. When the school's closure occurred, we were not able to do any evaluations. So that pause button was hit. When we came back to school this year, we reinitiated with the evaluation process. So we've been in the process of doing, I will say, catch up, as well as taking a look at our students, their needs, attempting to intervene. So from my perspective, I would say we are still in the process of catch up, and we could see that continuing as we move through the remainder of this year into next year. And as board members, you have also mentioned that concern over gaps. We continue to address the needs of our students, but we also don't know how that will necessarily play out in terms of student evaluations and or the potential for students to qualify for special education services. The next slide, again, really, this is just to give you a snapshot in time. So earlier I had presented to the board our December 1 count numbers. As of December 1, we had 827 students identified as special education students, or students receiving special education supports and services. As of 2 weeks ago, that same information, we now have 842 students qualifying for special education supports and services. And I'm sharing this because special education numbers are not stagnant. They change on a day-to-day basis. We could have students moving in or exiting the school district that change our numbers. We have students that qualify for special education services that change our numbers. And we have students sitting in the queue either to be evaluated or potentially becoming qualified for those services. What I'd also like to note is that typically we do not come to the school board during the school year to ask for any additional teaching staff. We have been to this point able to accommodate those numbers within the caseloads we have, but it does alter the caseloads as we move through the year, and it also could impact the need to potentially come to the board to request special education staff members. You'll see that our paraprofessional numbers are not the same as they were in December. We have had some paraprofessionals leave us. We are in an ongoing process of interviewing and attempting to hire paraprofessional staff to replace those that leave. But as of 2 weeks ago, these were our staffing numbers, as well as our students receiving special education supports and services. And the next piece that also impacts the staffing requests have to do with early intervention. And I have shared previously that these are our students that are transitioning from preschool to school age services. We partner with the MCIU, and we have been in the process of conducting meetings with the MCIU and with our families, bringing the families and the students in to do screenings and to talk about the types of supports and services that the children may need. Our next step will be to conduct evaluations and then to develop school appropriate IEPs. The projections at this point still remain with 35 students transitioning to us at the kindergarten level. 8 of those students receive speech-only services. And what we have identified is that there are 10 students at this time that will need autistic support programming. And as I've shared in some of the previous slides, that is one of our most intensive programs. By state mandate, the class size is no greater than 12 students. So we are anticipating that this will require additional staff and an additional classroom to be added for next school year. And I guess then too, this is where we come to the staffing needs. So from that information, earlier we had indicated that we expected to have the need for 2 special education teachers at the secondary level, initially thinking it would be a middle school and potentially high school. And at this time, because of the intensive nature of the students that are advancing from the middle school to the high school, the number is offset slightly. We have about, I would say about 40 students that are anticipated to graduate, but we have approximately 72, I believe, students going up to the high school. And we also have students that are staying through the age of 21 that we need 2 of the teachers at the high school level to support the needs of our students there. And then we are expecting to have a need for a special education teacher for autistic support at the elementary level. And then we do continue to look to an inclusion facilitator. And then because of the expected needs as well with autistic support, the board certified behavior analyst is an ask to support the behaviors for our intensive programming. So Mrs. Smith, I don't know if we want to go into professional staff, and the projections and then how we are going to prioritize those, or if the board has any questions that I can answer with regards to special education.
I would suggest if the board has anything about special education, we could answer those now, and then I can explain the staffing.
Perfect.
Mr. Dorr, I see your hand.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. How many students do we have, special needs or otherwise, that are over the age of 17 in the district?
I believe right now we have, well, in terms of when I think about our special, the populations, the more intensive, I believe what we are expecting for next year is that there are 15 students that will be in that transition age of 18 to 21 with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments for Dr. Boyd? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Boyd. So this slide hopefully looks familiar to you from previous months, trying to keep it in the same format. The enrollment report for March really does not look drastically different from February, so we are still anticipating in that column for projected staffing change based upon enrollment. Those numbers look the same. On the anticipated staffing request, what I circled in red are the any potential changes. So the +2 at the high school is to put both of those special education positions, which we've talked about before, at the high school. We were asking for 2 before, we just had 1 at East and 1 at the high school. So now we've identified that both of those will be needed at the high school. And then I did add here, based upon the recommendation for the elementary specials, the 2 health and wellness. And that continued autistic support is there that we believe that we will need based upon Dr. Boyd's presentation. So the only other thing that you will notice is different on this slide from last month is that the supervisor or coordinator for equity is no longer listed on this chart as a request for next year, as Dr. Russell will be speaking to that later in the agenda this evening. So it is a total of 9 positions, 3.5 of which we believe we can get based upon our reduction in enrollment. So it is a +5.5 positions that we are looking at. And Mr. Weaver will be presenting next week that he has had in his budget presentations from the beginning 6 positions. So currently it appears that we would be able to facilitate these positions given his budget projections, and you'll hear more from that next week. The next slide, or the last slide from us this evening, is what would the priority be for these positions in case we're not able to fulfill all of them? And Dr. Boyd and Dr. Russell and I have agreed that first and foremost, it is meeting the needs of our special education population. And so you'll see those 4 positions, the 2 at the high school, the BCBA, and the autistic support, if needed, at the elementary, would be our priority positions. And so you'll see those 4 listed there. Second, we have the focus on supporting teaching and learning with that instructional coach, inclusion facilitator that both Dr. Boyd and I have been speaking about. That position really impacts K-12 teachers. It is a support for teachers in how to provide accommodations and modifications and just good, best instructional practices for all of our students. So that position really has a broad range. And then finally, we have the health and wellness positions, prioritizing the elementary health and wellness 2 positions above the 2 middle school health positions. And tomorrow night at Wellness, we'll be talking a little bit more about both of those and curriculum and programming. But that is the order of priority at this point in time that we are presenting to the board. That is our education updates for this month, but I'm certainly happy to entertain any further questions. Mr. Dorr? Or maybe your hand was up from before. I apologize.
Sorry, it was up from before.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your time, Steve. Or Mrs. Lofton?
Sorry about that. So I do have a question. And one thing that I have heard a couple times now in conversations with elementary school parents is that due to their concerns about learning gaps that have emerged this year, they are considering having their child repeat a grade. And I'm curious if that's something that has been coming up to administration as a trend that you're seeing, and if you think that that is going to be influencing our enrollment projections.
That is a good question, Mrs. Lofton. To be honest, I have not heard that from our
Okay.
elementary principals yet, but I will certainly probe a little bit and see if they have. I can tell you that our fall map data was relatively comparable to a year ago's fall map data in reading and math. We
Okay.
are working on our winter assessment right now, and I'm very interested in seeing if we've been able to be comparable to where we were last year. That'll be a good indicator of any gaps, as you're saying, that maybe we would need to address. But when we
Okay.
talk about retention, it's certainly something that is not highly supported for our students. Maybe there's unique circumstances, but we would probably look at those individually. But I'll find out
Okay.
more information.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't certain how, it seemed like it was an idea that was starting to percolate for certain people as opposed to something that had become solidified as a plan. So I'm just curious what you're hearing. So that's a good sign that you haven't heard that yet.
Yeah, I'll see what I can find out for us.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith and Dr. Boyd, for that presentation. Moving on to item 4.02, the enrollment reports are presented. Mrs. Smith, did you have anything you wanted to point out, or Dr. Russell?
There are really no significant changes from our February enrollment reports to call out here.
Any board members have comments or questions on the enrollment reports? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so we'll move on. Section 4.03, the motion will be the approval to purchase HMH into reading as the K-5 English Language Arts resource in the amount of $483,714.65 as recommended by the Education Committee. Are there any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, let's move that to consent. Item 4.04, and action is requested tonight. So I will make a motion to approve K-8 LIFT Learning is Fun Together summer program as presented and recommended by the Education Committee. Do I have a second?
Second, Matthew Dorr.
Any comments or questions? Dr. Hallis, do you want me to ask for the vote?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, motion passes.
Okay. Item 4.05, the motion will be to approve the following revised international trip as reviewed and forwarded by building principals and district administration. And this is a recommendation to postpone the Europe trip for the high school, 62 students at no cost to the district. Any comments or questions?
Dr. Kolar, if I could, I apologize, just chime in here. This was revised today. There is a cost to the district that we would like the board to consider. Because the trip was initially planned in July, there was not a substitute cost associated. And now because we're moving it to May to have it scheduled prior to the students graduating, there are 5 days of substitute costs. And we would really like to not pass that cost on to our students. They're already paying, as you can see, I think, $3,500 or more for their trip. And it's really not their fault that we are, being delayed. So we would like to ask the board to consider covering that cost of $3,650, which includes the substitute cost for the 4 teachers that would be attending, as well as a nurse if we are able to secure one. And you'll notice if you looked at when this was initially approved, we only had anticipated 49 students. We actually have 62 students. So that's what drove out the additional 1 teacher compared to when it was approved a year ago. So just wanted to make sure you understood that and see if you were willing to consider the district supporting those substitute costs instead of passing that on to our students.
Thank you for catching that. I had looked at it earlier and there was no cost, so I apologize. I do see Mrs. Lofton's hand up.
So I actually have 2 questions related to that. The first is so I assume based on how you just explained that students would not be able to participate in the trip if it was in July 2022 after graduating. Is that correct? Or could we hold it in July of 2022 and let those students participate after graduating?
So we did just discuss that, and it's our recommendation to hold the trip while they are still considered PV students and need to follow our, student code of conduct and all of those other pieces that go with being a student and not being a graduate. So we did look to see where would be the best timing of that, but that's why we're recommending in the spring, specifically during those last 3 weeks, which are typically career study. And as you mentioned earlier, our students are not normally on site for that time. And we're looking to make connections between the Europe trip and possibly career standards so that they are also still getting some of that exposure.
So then my other question to that is, do we charge students for the substitute teacher costs for other trips? For example, the Disney trip. Are the students who are going on the Disney trip covering the substitute teacher costs?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Weaver or Dr. Russell. Do you know that answer? I know we recently changed policy that substitute costs did not necessarily need to be approved by the board unless they, were substantial or an overnight trip. But Dr. Russell or Mr. Weaver, are you familiar with that? I'd have to look back at field trip requests.
Yeah, that's what I was going to recommend. I mean, I'd have to look it up. I don't remember offhand, actually.
I would agree with Dr. Russell at this time. We just
Okay.
have to do some more research.
Yeah, so I would just be curious and want to make sure that we're being fair to all the different trips that take place in how we are managing the substitute teacher costs. I think that if I recall, what we had said was that the students would not be required to cover the substitute teacher costs for the field trips that were taking place as part of our regular curriculum. So for example, all of fourth grade goes somewhere together. The students would not be responsible for any cost for the nurse or the substitute teachers. But for the more elective field trip costs, I thought that the students were responsible for those costs.
I can certainly do some investigation and provide more information in the memo, so you have that prior to next week.
Okay, great, thank you.
So I would suggest that maybe we leave this item off consent. So until we have more information, is that good with everyone? Okay. Okay, so moving on to item 4.06. The motion will be to approve the phased school reopening health and safety plan version 16 for the 2020-2021 school year as presented. I believe there is a summary of the revisions. Dr. Russell, did you want to go through that?
Yes, I can very briefly highlight some of the changes and give you a sense of where we focused. There was a revision today. After speaking with Mr. Subers, we wanted to revise how the information was articulated in that introductory paragraph. So while we really aren't using the color designations, if you remember the yellow, green, and red phases from last summer, the state is not depending upon those phases to make determinations about what happens in schools. They have instead shifted to that attestation form in November, and then in January to an updated version of that attestation form. And we've tried to articulate that accurately. So there was a revision to that first sentence and the way the second sentence reads. That brings us up to date real time with how we are being guided at the state level when there are positive cases of COVID in our schools. And throughout, we shifted anywhere we saw 6 feet. And these parentheses here are actually a typo. There shouldn't be parentheses around the 6 feet. However, what's important to note is that wherever there were 6 feet, it was shifted to 6 feet to the greatest extent possible. That's the phrasing that we're using. We continue to aim for 6 feet. It will be 6 feet to the greatest extent possible as our recommendation. While in the cafeteria, we want to maintain that 6 feet while students are eating and unmasked. We would like to propose a shift in the language around volunteers and again, reignite a volunteer campaign and invite our parents in to support in some of those aspects of the school day that we talked about. Some minor changes here around when students are out at recess and using the playground, and limiting those supplies that our students share, continuing to try and focus on students using their own personal items as they're participating in some of their coursework or their special area subjects. We also mentioned that there are times during the school day when it's really unavoidable that our students will be closer than 6 feet. However, it should not ever be for 15 minutes or more without a mask. In the case of lunch, we're trying to stick to that very specifically. In classrooms, our students will be masked. They may at times be less than 6 feet. However, when they're in the hallways, they'll be much closer than some of those ranges we were talking about earlier tonight. But they're transient, they're temporary. They will not be for extended periods of time. We've updated our dashboard. Hopefully you find that informative. And Another comment about volunteers, were we to bring those back into the school setting? And then we changed some of the titles for personnel referenced towards the end of the health and safety plan, from manager of school and community engagement, which was Mrs. Lester's title, to now the one that Dr. Parr, which is different, but really just as part of the communications department, as well as the executive director of human resources. So some of the changes minor, but really the most significant, calling out the phrasing around 6 feet and this introductory paragraph.
Any board comments or questions? I'm not seeing hands raised. Okay. So can we move item 4.06 to consent, please? Okay, that brings us to item 4.07. The recommended action is a motion to approve a shift in the elementary school schedule from half-day instructional model to 5 full days per week on site in person beginning March 22nd, 2021. The virtual instructional model will be maintained as an option for students. So I know that there is not recommended action for tonight, but I'm wondering if it would make sense to make a motion for this, because I'm concerned that giving 2 weeks notice to teachers and families may not be enough time. And if we're going to vote to move this forward, I would prefer to have time, especially if we're looking at getting parent volunteers in to help and getting commitments. I feel like we're cutting it close if we wait until next week. So I would actually suggest we move on this tonight.
I second that, Rena. Dr. Kolar, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Dr. Kolar, if you can make a formal motion, and then Ms. White, if you.
Sure. Okay, so I'll just repeat. So I move to approve the shift in the elementary school schedule from half-day instructional model to 5 full days per week on site in person beginning March 22nd, 2021. The virtual instructional model will be maintained as an option for students.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion passes.
Okay, item 4.08. Once again, I will go ahead and make a motion to approve a shift in the middle school schedule from the hybrid instructional model to 5 full days per week on site in person beginning March 22nd, 2021. The virtual instructional model will be maintained as an option for students.
Second, Matthew Dorr.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
I'm sorry, Dr. Hallis, Maggie had her hand raised, so I wanted to give an opportunity for question or comment before we
Okay, I
voted.
didn't see it. So if you would, we'll hold that for a second. Ms. McGovern, if you want to go ahead, please.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to clarify that this is now a motion. It's not just moving to consent, so this would actually happen, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. And I just wanted to remind the board that I think it was Mr. McGill who said that I don't know if all the teachers are necessarily on board with the 6 feet, and I just wanted to throw that out there before you voted. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. So for item 4.08, we had a motion and a second, and we were about to ask for, or I started to ask for, all those in favor, please?
Aye.
Aye.
Nays? Okay, motion passes.
Okay, item 4.09. I will make a motion to approve the shift at the high school schedule from the hybrid instructional model to 5 full days per week on site in person beginning March 22nd, 2021. The virtual instructional model will be maintained as an option for students.
Second.
Second, Wade.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do you have any nays? Okay, motion passes.
Okay, that concludes my section.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kolar. That brings us to section 5, the business section. Mr. Dorr, if you would, please.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Hallis. Section 5.01 will be a finance update. Mr. Weaver, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. Good evening, everybody. We do have a quick finance update. There's a lot packed into this. We have about 8 or 9 slides here to go over in regards to finances for the school district for tonight. So, Dr. Russell, moving forward, we'll review the loan ESCO 4.0 RFP that was received from CM3. Real quick, we'll have a summary of that. We'll review the bond parameters resolution just for the board's edification as we move forward on the bond issue associated with the ESCO 4.0. Quick updates on middle school west elevator and the underground storage tank closure, and then a COVID grants update that we've been doing on a monthly basis, and then a brief setup for discussion associated with parking fees and activity fees for the 21-22 school year. Dr. Russell. So as I previously said, we had 1 response to our RFP. We did advertise for 3 consecutive weeks. We did receive the bid from CM3. The important details of the contract are there. And there is a preliminary contract that was provided. Mr. Subers is reviewing that contract. And we do anticipate that next week we'll have full board recommendation for a board approval on the 8th for to approve CM3 to do the ESCO 4.0 contract as we have planned with the programming for 4.0. Any questions on that one? Okay, moving forward, the bond per issue parameters resolution, just a reminder for the board that the maximum amount of our bond issue is $6 million. However, Jamie Doyle has recommended that we move forward with the bond issue parameters, which helps to set up and allow the financial advisors, PFM here in this particular case, some flexibility for us to manage a better rate. There could be a couple of bidders out there on our internet bid auction for the $6 million that they might be able to adjust some of their interest rate expenses by a couple of percentage points if it was a little bit more and a little bit less. This parameters we've done in the past, this resolution helps to maximize our ability to get the best deal that is appropriate and out there. I've included the email and some information from Jamie Doyle in case anybody from the school board or the public in general has any questions as far as why it's a maximum of $6 million, but yet the parameters resolution says $7 million. Again, the crux of the discussion point is really within the email that I've copied and pasted from Jamie Doyle. Any questions from the school board? Okay, thank you. And again, we have done that in the past and we've been very successful with that. One point of reference today, we did receive late in the afternoon, our Standard & Poor's bond rating was reaffirmed at AA stable, which is a really good bond rating. I'm so very proud of the work that Mrs. Hurd and I have done to achieve that rate. And it's been affirmed again. So that is a huge positive for us. We get much better costs associated. We do not need bond insurance for our bond issue as well. That saves us about $50,000 moving forward. So I just wanted to add that in there. Middle School West Elevator, we did bring this to the Finance Committee. We did review this, or the Safety and Operations Committee, and we are moving forward with a request and a recommendation to finally fix the brains of the Middle School West Elevator at a KPN total cost of $35,708. Any questions on that? Thank you. Moving forward to the underground storage tank. Again, this issue just popped up in the fall. Mr. Clemmer and his team did a wonderful turnaround to get us some options. We moved forward with the rental of an above ground tank. And now we're recommending that we move forward to close the underground storage tank in the ground to address the issues that started this whole thing. This is a KPN contract. And this is not to exceed $47,900.24 as recommended by the Safety and Operations Committee. Real quick, COVID grants update. Not much has changed from the February item. Again, this is just to keep these grant opportunities fresh in front of the school board, and to also let you know that now that the President Biden's stimulus package has passed the House, it now moves on to the Senate, and the sticky point associated with that was the prevailing wage, and I understand that they've kind of put that to the side. So we're relatively hopeful that the $1.9 trillion package, which we have been told has upwards of $1.8 million associated with Perkiomen Valley right now, will be reasonably assured moving forward. That's just a point of reference for us. We don't know what those numbers will actually be, but that's a pretty good read for us. Mr. Dorr, you have your hand raised.
I do. Thanks, Mr. Weaver. Can you go back to the last slide? Did I mishear you? We're going to close the tank versus taking it out? Or
Yes.
did I mishear you?
No, we are going to close the tank in ground. And the reason for that is that they're going to go in and they're going to clean it out. And with the pressure issues that the tank had, that we know that it's had in the ground, it's easier for us to clean it and to leave it in the ground with a mixture and a fluid that solidifies once they go in and clean it out. And then we just leave it there. It's also in a really weird spot for us because it's right in the loading dock area of Middle School West. So it's not like it's on the side of the building where we could just easily dig like south. We went there and it was on the side of the building. We could just dig it right out. This one is right in the middle of our loading dock area by design. So by doing it and filling it in place there, we also avoid taking our loading dock out for a significant period of time.
Okay, we're not breaking any regulations. That's all. I mean, I assume we're not.
Yeah, it's all subject to required environmental regulations, testing, certification.
Okay. Thanks, Ms. Weaver.
You're welcome. Any questions on the COVID grants? Okay, thank you. Moving forward, for tonight, we have a small discussion on parking and student activity fees. The board will remember, if the board remembers last year when we prepared the 2020-2021 budget, we actually removed the revenue streams for the parking fees, and we removed the activity fee for middle school sports. We did leave the activity fees in for the high school at a certain point in time because we had already collected some of those fees. What the recommendation is, and the conversation is do we want to reinvent and re-add those revenue streams back into the 2021-2022 general fund budget? Right now they are out of our budget. Those revenue streams have already been reduced. The further discussion is, do we want to completely eliminate the activity fee for the high school, or do we want to leave it as is, as we've adjusted it for the 2020-2021 school year? I'll leave it open for discussion. We don't have to figure that out tonight. It's just one of those items that's a key component to our budgetary conversations moving forward. Mr. Dorr.
Mr. Weaver, I know we talked about this in Finance Committee. Is this something we can bring back to Finance Committee and talk about a little bit more? I know we don't have to solve it tonight, but I think we need a little more information as far as, are we making sure that it's spread across the student body, equally?
Absolutely. It was a conversation that Mrs. Hurd and I had because this was an item that in the Finance Committee was determined that it's important for us to keep in the air so that everybody understands as we work our way through it. We could certainly take it back to the Finance Committee, delve deeper into it, and then bring a recommendation out.
I concur with Mr. Dorr on that too, because it's also the fact we'll be bringing students back in March, so there's only a few months left in the year as well. So, but if we could kick it back to finance. Thank you.
That is absolutely fine with me. Anybody? That's all I have for tonight. Anything else from a finance perspective? Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. So 5.02, report on grants and donations. We had 2 grants. We had $160,187 for Chromebooks. We also had a $3,000 one from Giant Food Stores for hand sanitizers. 5.03 is moved to March 8th. 5.04, there'll be a motion to approve ComSys Inc., CSI, to install the high school gymnasium sound system at a cost of $21,776 per co-stars and prevailing wages. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, can we move that to consent, please? 5.05, there'll be a motion to ratify an upgrade to the current HUDL software package at a total cost of $9,900 per year for 2-year subscription to provide software and equipment for broadcasting all PVSD sports. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, can we move that to consent, please? 5.06, motion to approve stipulations to settle tax assessment appeals for the property located at 709 Main Street, Schwenksville, parcel number 20-00-00364-00-3, as provided by the solicitor and business administrator. Any questions? Okay, can we please move that to consent? 5.07, there will be a motion to approve stipulations to settle tax assessment appeals for the property located at 534 2nd Avenue, Condo 1, Collegeville, as provided by the solicitor and business administrator. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, can we move those to that to consent, please? 5.08, motion to ratify S.J. Thomas Company, Inc. to replace the Middle School West main elevator control board under KPN contract at a cost not to exceed $35,708. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, can we move that to consent, please? 5.09 is a motion to approve S.J. Thomas Company, Inc. to close the Middle School West underground storage tank in place under KPN contract at a cost not to exceed $47,900.24. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, please move to consent. 5.10, a motion to approve a 2-year subscription agreement with masterlibrary.com LLC for facilities rental software at a cost not to exceed $2,850 for year 1 and $5,500 for year 2. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, can you move to consent, please? 5.11, there will be a motion to approve the debt incurring resolution as prepared by bond counsel. Actual amount issued will not exceed $7 million. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, can we please move that to consent?
Mr. Doer, could I request that that stay off of consent because we don't have the finalized resolution? This is a draft resolution, just in case there's any changes between now and next week.
Absolutely. So let's keep that up consent. So 5.12, there'll be a motion to award a guaranteed energy savings contract to CM3 Building Solutions, Inc. with total project costs exclusive of financing costs not to exceed a $6 million contingent upon finalization of the contract documents by the district administrator and solicitor, securement of necessary financing for the guaranteed energy saving contract, and the provision of all required bonds, insurances, and guarantees by CM3. Any questions? So, Mr. Suber, should this stay off as well, or is this okay to move forward to consent?
As worded, you can put it. You can leave it on consent if you'd like.
I mean, put it on consent subject to 511.
Oh, that's true. Well, it's as worded. It's subject to approval or receipt of the approval of financing. So you can leave this on consent.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we'll move this to consent. So 5.13 will be an update by Mr. Weaver next week, and that ends my section.
Thank you much, Mr. Doer. That brings us to section 6, payment of bills. If you would, Dr. Weston, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hallis. Item 6.01, the ratification of bills and payroll and the authorization of payments. And item 6.02, the approval of the treasurer's report and financial statements. Both of these items will be presented for action next week at the March 8th meeting. And that concludes section 6.
Thank you, Dr. Weston. That brings us to section 7, professional personnel. Ms. White, if you would, please.
I'm so sorry. I was on mute. Items 701, 2, 3, and 4 are all on consent. Item 705 is a motion to approve the creation of one full-time coordinator of equity and inclusion and community engagement position as part of the Act 93 agreement. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I will move this to consent. Item 7.06 is to request action. It's a to request action item. It's a motion to approve the provisional employment of the professional personnel as listed, pending fulfillment of all statutory requirements, and I so move.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Do I have any nays? Okay, the motion passes.
And item 7.07 is on consent as well. And that ends my section.
Thank you, Ms. White. That brings us to Section 8, Support Personnel. Mrs. Roberts, if you would, please.
Good evening, everybody. 8.01, 8.02, 8.03, and 8.04 are all on consent, and that concludes Section 8.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Roberts. That brings us to Section 9, Governance. Mrs. Mayers, if you would, please.
Thank you. The following policies are presented for a first reading: 113.3 and 903. Any questions? Okay, so if we can move that. 9.02, approval to hold a second reading and adopt the policies. It's a motion to hold a second reading and adopt the following policies: 006, 006.2, 103, 218.3, 252, 620, 906, 910, and 916. Any questions? Okay, and I so move.
So Ashley, that'll be for next week.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm tired.
No worries.
9.03 was removed. 9.04, approval of resolution. It's a motion to approve resolution supporting equity, inclusion, and diversity as presented. Any questions? Okay, so if we can move
If
that.
you want, Ms. Mayers, I just sorry to interrupt, but if you like, if
Do you want me to read
nobody
it?
has questions, you can always try to ask to put it on consent.
Okay, so let's move that to consent, please. And then 9.05, a motion to approve a resolution to call upon the Pennsylvania Department of Health to secure and distribute the proper amount of COVID-19 vaccines in order to vaccinate our school staff now. Are there any questions? If we could move that to consent, please.
Mayors, I apologize. I had my hand up.
Sorry.
Considering the vote we just moved forward with, can we take action on this tonight?
We probably can if, you know, that's fine. If so, Ms. Mayers, if you want to make a motion.
I make a motion to approve the resolution to call upon the Pennsylvania Department of Health to secure and distribute the proper amount of COVID-19 vaccines in order to vaccinate our school staff now.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do any nays? Okay, motion passes.
Thank you. That ends my section.
Okay, that brings us to Section 10, closing items. We'll accept comments from the audience at this time. Again, if you do choose to comment, 1, please raise your hand so we know, and then 2, please state your name and the municipality you're from or the building you work in. And with that, Mr. Ganesh, if you would kindly unmute Mr. Liggett.
Thank you, Mr. Ganesh. Thank you, Dr. Hollis. And I hope I'm just so proud of what the board has done tonight. You guys took action on something that so many of us has wanted to happen. And it just, I commend you all for doing that, for taking the vote tonight and not pushing it off to next week. And on behalf of the community and those of us that have worked really hard to see this happen, I just can't tell you how thrilled I am. And I would just like to thank you all again for doing this. And we still got a lot more work to do here to make this happen. And I hope the rest of the community gets behind you and helps out with all that we need to do. This obviously reopening is not the only issue that we're ever going to have to deal with. There's a lot to do. And I hope the community stays engaged in the rest of the issues that affect our school district. Thank you again to everyone. And thank you, Dr. Russell, for leading the charge on this. It really speaks to your leadership in this district. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands. Just waiting to see if one pops up. Okay, well, with that then, I will assume there's no more public comments. That brings us to item 10.02, which is comments from board members. Anybody need to make a comment? Hold on, sorry, I got to switch over to the side. Okay, so not sure who went first or whose hand was up first. So why don't we start with Dr. Weston, if you would, please.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Hallis. First, I'll say, I'm very pleased with the actions that we've taken tonight. We've come a long way with this situation that we're in, and I'm very pleased and very proud of how we are moving forward at this time. Still a lot of work to do, but we're really, we're moving things forward. And as we are thinking about having students come back into school, I just like for us as a board to think about re-engaging in in-person meetings again. It's great that we have the tools to conduct an efficient and productive virtual meeting, but frankly, it's nice if we can get together too. I haven't seen any of you all in months, and I'd like to see you guys again. So I hope we can consider that.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Weston. Ms. McGovern, if you would, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I know I'm a student representative, but if I may speak to the teachers for a minute, I in no way mean to discredit or invalidate the work of the board and Dr. Russell and the administration, because it is really amazing everything you guys have been able to do, and a leading school district at that in the county. But I do feel that moving forward, we really have to keep in mind the teachers' needs, because it was said tonight that not all teachers, or at least a majority, were not really okay and on board with the less than 6 feet. And I think at least once every board meeting it comes up that how much we appreciate our teachers and we thank our teachers, but when it comes time to do something for them, we have to do what's in their best interest. And I can't imagine the pressure you guys are under from the community and from all these other sources, but in moving forward, and even if that means taking a step back, I think it's really important we do what's best for the teachers as well, because we owe it to them because of everything they've done for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dorr, if you would, please.
I wanted to echo just as much what Maggie said, sorry, Mr. McGovern said, as well as Dr. Weston, but I mean, the work's not done. We did the vote tonight, but we still have to make sure that we keep advocating for who wants to get vaccinated, gets vaccinated. I'm ecstatic about the decision, but I also value all the emails we've received in the last year from both parents for and against. I think a lot of the data we got were from parents that took the extra time to find clinical studies, whether they were things, something that happened in Europe or something that happened, in other countries. We got a lot of stuff from parents advocating both for and against. And regardless of what the decision was tonight, I wish those parents would continue to advocate, because we only know what we know. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. Mrs. Roberts, if you would, please.
Yeah, I just want to say that as we move forward in this, I sincerely hope that all of the promises that we got from parents all over the district will be fulfilled. They promise to help. They promise to be available. They promise to volunteer. We're going to need them. And so it's time to put your little email writing fingers into maybe recess monitoring fingers or lunch monitoring fingers or whatever it is you can do. I sincerely hope that I can take you at your word that you're prepared to help with this, because this is not something that we can do either on our own, nor is it something we should be expecting us to do on our own. These are your children. So if you can help at all, if you can volunteer at all, if you can help teachers get vaccinated at all by being an advocate for them and getting them onto lists where they can be vaccinated, if you can sign petitions to get them vaccinated first under 1A, I sincerely hope that you go and do that, because it's necessary. It's going to be an interesting few weeks. And so I sincerely hope that we can finally all get on board together. We're none of us enemies. I just want everybody to be able to do what they can do to get this ship turned around.
Are there any other board members? Oh, are you, Dr. Russell? Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Hallis. For some reason, I don't have the hand feature. However, I would like to extend thanks and appreciation to the board, not only for your support of these motions this evening, but also for your guidance and your prompting and the questions that you pose to help us, administration, get this as right as it can be under the circumstances. So thank you. I look forward to continuing towards providing the best possible experiences to all of our students possible, and really, truly light through darkness as we continue to progress to better things in the pandemic. Thank you.
Dr. Kolar, if you would, please.
Thanks, Dr. Hallis. So I just wanted to say that the main reason I wanted to vote on things tonight is because, again, I felt like waiting till next week was just not giving us enough time to really do the best job we can with moving forward. So I hope that when we send out these parent surveys this week, that it's clear to families that they are now making a commitment. It's not just a survey about your opinion, that we need real numbers. And I think administration needs to commit to following up with every single family if we don't hear from them. You know, we had a good survey turnout, but 65-70% is not enough. We need real numbers now. So I'm looking forward to getting that information moving forward. But again, I really hope that, you know, every minute counts now. We have 3 weeks to do this and do it well. So I hope we're all ready to keep working.
Ms. White, if you would, please.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Dr. Kolar said, and also Ms. McGovern, thank you for speaking up with your voice, and your perspective is always really valued, you know, in this group setting. And I know that you are very thoughtful in your commentary. So I just wanted to say that our commitment and my commitment to the safety and the welfare of our teachers and staff is unchanged by this vote tonight. If anything, it is more resolute than ever. Ultimately, we always knew we were going to be going back into the buildings, and postponing this vote until next week wouldn't have really done anything but delay this conversation. So I want to allow administration and our buildings, all of our custodial staff and all of that, the extra, you know, the grace of the extra week of time to really get everything in order so we can find out what we don't know sooner rather than later. So anyway, I wish everybody good luck and a lot of, newfound energy to get this off on the right foot for all of our families. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White. Any other board members desiring to be heard? Okay, I just have a quick comment because, you know, and I'm just going to be frank about this. I have spent months being attacked by certain people in this community. And Dr. Russell will confirm this. We're opening, and I was a pain about it. I was a pain about it, not in the way that has been portrayed publicly, but I repeatedly said to Dr. Russell, show this board we can open, make sure we can feed people, clean up, do everything we need to do. And, you know, we're opening, and we're opening according to the guidelines in the attestation form. When you hit 5%, the ball game changes. Last week, we were at what, 5.88%. So we've set it up where the expectation is we'll be at 5%. And, you know, we'll move to the next stage. And I just think that speaks volumes that this board has behaved and moved in a very responsible fashion and really tried to assess the situation and go through it. And that is not how we've been portrayed in public in many occasions. And, you know, it's regrettable. It really is regrettable, because it really puts a bad light on the whole community, and it's not the whole community that's acting that way. So hopefully now going forward, we can get past a lot of that stuff, because all it really does is get in the way of what we're really here for, which is to run a school district and to do what we can for the students, and at the same time do everything we can to make sure that our staff is safe as they do it. And that's what this board has tried to do, and I hope with this plan we'll do successfully. So that's it. I have to say about it, unless there's any other board member that desires to make a comment. Seeing none, I just want to announce that we did meet prior to this meeting for an executive session to talk about matters of personnel. And with that, if there is nothing else, I will adjourn the meeting. Good night, everybody.
Night, Jean.
You have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.